Hi guys. Tonight we're stepping into a land that seems to stretch forever, where the morning sun rises over endless grass. Distant rivers shimmer like silver ribbons, and mountains wait beyond the edge of every map. You stand at the beginning of a journey across the Old West, a place that is often remembered through legends of cowboys and gunfighters, yet built by ordinary people carrying impossible hopes. Around you, wagons creak beneath heavy loads, horses stamp the damp earth, and families glance westward with equal measures of excitement and quiet fear. Every mile promises opportunity. Every mile also hides uncertainty. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. While you settle in, I would also love to know where you are listening from tonight, and what your local time is. It is always remarkable to see how people from every corner of the world gather together to explore history before sleep. Now, dim the lights. Your breathing slows as you leave behind the familiar world of crowded eastern towns. Ahead lies a continent that many Americans of the early 19th century barely understand. Official maps contain wide, blank spaces. Rivers disappear into uncertainty. Mountain ranges remain little more than distant rumors carried home by traders. The year is 1803. News spreads through the young United States that the government has purchased an enormous territory from France. The Louisiana Purchase nearly doubles the nation's size almost overnight. Modern historians generally agree that this becomes one of the most important land acquisitions in American history. Research at Harvard University has emphasized how dramatically the purchase reshaped the political and economic future of the United States, opening possibilities few citizens could fully imagine. Yet nobody standing beside you truly understands what all this new land contains. The air smells of wet soil after a spring rain. Leather saddles carry the scent of hard use. Nearby, smoke rises from simple cooking fires where breakfast quietly bubbles inside the iron pots. The food is plain. The conversations are not. Everyone wonders the same thing: what waits beyond the horizon? Some believe endless farmland stretches west forever. Others expect rich forests, hidden rivers, and peaceful valleys. A few fear deserts where nothing grows. Nobody knows. That uncertainty gives the frontier its strange power. You are not simply traveling across land. You are walking into questions without answers. Children chase each other beside wagons, while parents quietly inspect broken harnesses. Small repairs matter. A loose strap today may become disaster hundreds of miles later, even before the great migrations begin. Experienced travelers understand that tiny problems grow quickly on long journeys. Your attention drifts toward an elderly hunter sharpening his knife with slow, practiced movements. His coat smells faintly of wood smoke. His boots have crossed places that most people have only heard described. He does not speak much. People who spend years in wild country often learn that silence carries its own wisdom. For a moment, everything feels peaceful. Birdsong fills the cool morning air. Gentle wind brushes through tall grass. Somewhere beyond sight, a river continues its endless journey south. Then reality quietly returns. This land is not empty. Long before American settlers arrive, countless native nations have lived across these landscapes for generations beyond memory. Their communities maintain rich traditions, extensive trade networks, sophisticated diplomacy, and deep knowledge of local environments. Villages rise beside rivers. Hunting grounds follow ancient seasonal patterns. Sacred places connect families to ancestors through stories carried across centuries. Many newcomers fail to understand this. Some choose not to understand. As you continue westward, the distance between imagination and reality slowly begins to narrow. Government officials organize expeditions to learn what this immense territory actually contains. Among the most famous are the explorers Meriwether Lewis and William Clark, whose expedition begins in 1804. Supported by President Thomas Jefferson, their mission combines diplomacy, scientific observation, mapping, and practical exploration. Research at Stanford University has noted that the expedition gathered remarkable information about geography, wildlife, plants, and native communities while producing maps that proved invaluable for future travelers. Still, historians continue debating exactly how much immediate influence their published findings had upon ordinary settlers during the earliest decades. Some argue their reports quickly inspired Western ambitions. Others suggest economic opportunities and later migration waves played even greater roles in encouraging expansion. The debate remains thoughtful rather than dramatic. History often unfolds through many causes instead of one. You imagine Lewis and Clark pushing heavy boats against stubborn currents. Their clothes stay damp for days. Mosquitoes gather whenever the wind fades. Boots never seem completely dry. Every evening brings another careful entry into weathered journals. Exploration rarely resembles adventure stories. It usually resembles exhausting work. Your own imagined footsteps now follow rivers flowing through quiet valleys. Cottonwood trees whisper overhead. Deer pause only briefly before disappearing into thick brush. Fresh animal tracks cross muddy banks, each print hinting at unseen lives surrounding you. You realize something surprisingly simple. Every map begins as someone's difficult walk. That thought lingers comfortably. Far to the east, cities continue growing. Merchants discuss shipping prices. Politicians debate national priorities. Newspapers print speeches and arguments. Meanwhile, out here, distance changes everything. News arrives slowly. Supplies arrive even slower. Patience becomes survival. A woman carefully folds a worn blanket before placing it inside a wooden chest. It once belonged to her mother. She has carried it through several moves already. It offers little protection against severe winters, yet she refuses to leave it behind. Objects carry memories. The frontier will demand difficult choices about what deserves space inside a wagon. As afternoon sunlight softens, you pass small trading posts where different worlds briefly meet. Hunters exchange animal pelts. Native traders offer carefully prepared goods. Travelers purchase flour, salt, and precious ammunition. Languages differ. Customs differ. Yet commerce creates moments of cautious cooperation. Not every meeting ends peacefully. Not every disagreement becomes violence. Most daily interactions remain practical because survival encourages compromise. The smell of fresh-cut timber drifts through the settlement. Someone repairs wagon wheels beneath a rough shelter. Iron rims ring sharply against wooden spokes. Nearby, children laugh while chasing a stray chicken between stacked barrels. Life continues through ordinary moments. That may be the greatest surprise. Popular imagination often remembers only dramatic events. Yet, the Old West grows because millions of ordinary tasks repeat endlessly. Meals must be cooked. Clothes require mending. Animals need water. Wells must be dug. Roofs demand repairs after storms. Civilizations rise through routines. Evening slowly arrives. Golden light stretches across open fields. Horse breath hangs faintly in cooling air. Campfires appear one by one. Tiny islands of warmth against gathering darkness. Someone quietly hums an old tune without words. Another traveler stares silently towards distant hills, wondering whether tomorrow's road will be kind. You find yourself sharing that quiet hope. Ahead lie mountains, rivers, deserts, conflicts, friendships, discoveries, and disappointments. The journey has barely begun. Yet already you sense that the history of the Old West will never belong to one group alone. It belongs to explorers and settlers, native nations and traders, soldiers and schoolteachers, ranchers and railroad workers, dreamers and skeptics alike. The frontier is not simply a place. It is a changing conversation between people and landscape, ambition and endurance, opportunity and consequence. Tonight, you've only taken the first few careful steps into that immense story. The horizon still waits, and beyond it, history quietly unfolds. Morning arrives almost unnoticed. Cool mist hangs above the river, softening every distant outline until trees and hills seem to drift between earth and sky. The camp slowly awakens without hurry. Someone stirs fading embers back into life. A horse shakes the night's moisture from its mane. Tin cups clink together as water begins to warm above a patient fire. The smell of damp leather mixes with fresh coffee, creating one of those simple comforts that travelers remember long after individual days have faded. You continue west, following paths that hardly deserve the name. Most are little more than narrow traces pressed into the earth by generations of feet, hooves, and wagon wheels. Long before American surveyors arrive with chains and measuring instruments, these routes already connect rivers, hunting grounds, villages, and mountain passes. They exist because countless native communities have learned, over many centuries, exactly where water can be found, where rivers may be crossed safely, and which valleys remain passable through changing seasons. The frontier rarely begins from nothing. Instead, newcomers inherit landscapes already understood by others. That reality is easy to overlook if you only glance at later maps. Blank spaces often suggest emptiness, yet the land around you is full of memory. Every bend in the river has a story. Every ridge has witnessed travelers whose names never entered written records. You walk beside a narrow trail worn smooth by generations. Grass bends gently along its edges. Small stones shift beneath your boots. The path seems almost modest, yet it carries extraordinary importance. Without these early routes, exploration would have been far slower and considerably more dangerous. Modern archaeological research has repeatedly confirmed that many famous Western trails later used by settlers followed much older indigenous travel corridors. Scholars at Yale University have highlighted how existing native transportation networks shaped the movement of explorers, traders, missionaries, and eventually emigrant wagon trains across the continent. Recognition of this fact has grown steadily among historians. Its full implications remain the subject of thoughtful discussion. Some researchers emphasize that later American expansion depended heavily upon indigenous geographic knowledge. Others argue that while native guidance proved invaluable in many regions, American engineering, military logistics, and private investment later transformed these routes into entirely different transportation systems. The balance between inherited knowledge and later development continues to invite careful debate. History often grows through layers rather than replacements. You pause beside a broad river where several canoes glide silently across calm water. Their movement appears effortless. The paddles enter the surface without splashing. The boats seem almost part of the river itself. Nearby, European-style flatboats struggle against the current, requiring ropes, poles, and determined labor simply to make slow progress. The contrast says much. Technology always reflects environment. Those who know the rivers best often build the simplest solutions. Your attention shifts toward a small trading post standing beside the water. It consists of only a handful of rough buildings surrounded by stacked barrels, drying hides, and fenced livestock. Yet its influence stretches hundreds of miles beyond its weathered walls. Inside, conversations flow constantly. Prices for beaver pelts, news from distant settlements, rumors of mountain passes, reports of unusually harsh winters, whispers of conflict. Hope travels here alongside uncertainty. The trader behind the counter keeps careful records inside thick account books. Every shipment matters. Salt, iron tools, blankets, flour, and ammunition all arrive after long and expensive journeys. A delayed wagon may affect dozens of families waiting farther west. Commerce moves more slowly than ambition. Outside, a blacksmith works patiently beneath an open shelter. His hammer strikes glowing iron with measured rhythm. Each blow rings across the settlement before fading into the surrounding forest. Sparks briefly dance through cool air before disappearing into damp ground. The smell of hot metal mixes with wood smoke. It is strangely comforting. You notice how everyone seems occupied with practical tasks. Wheels require repair. Horseshoes wear thin. Harnesses crack under constant strain. Clothing tears against brush and rock. Survival depends less upon dramatic heroics than quiet maintenance. Even strong dreams need sturdy equipment as you continue onward. Forests gradually begin giving way to wider valleys. Rivers spread into open floodplains where grasses ripple beneath steady wind. Herds of deer appear briefly before vanishing into distant tree lines. Overhead, hawks circle almost motionless, watching movements invisible from the ground. Nature observes every traveler equally. The road itself changes constantly. Some stretches become deep mud after rain. Others harden into rough stone that jars every wagon wheel. Fallen trees block progress without warning. Small creeks may become dangerous rivers within hours after mountain storms. Distance refuses easy measurement. A journey planned for 10 days may require 20. One family traveling ahead of you has already learned this lesson. Their youngest child quietly gathers smooth stones from each river crossing, carefully placing them inside a cloth bag. The collection has no financial value. Yet every stone marks another successful day completed together. Years later, perhaps those stones will tell their own silent history. Simple objects often preserve extraordinary emotions. By afternoon, clouds gather across the western horizon. Shadows stretch longer over the trail. The wind carries the sharp scent of approaching rain mixed with crushed sage beneath passing wagon wheels. Nobody complains. Weather belongs to everyone. Shelter, however, does not. Canvas covers are tightened. Supplies are wrapped carefully. Loose equipment is secured before the first drops begin falling. Experience teaches preparation long before emergencies arrive. Rain finally comes in steady sheets. Water drums softly against wagon tops. Horses lower their heads. Boots sink into fresh mud with heavy sucking sounds. Progress slows almost immediately. Yet nobody suggests turning back. Forward remains the only direction. You begin noticing something else as evening approaches. The farther west you travel, the less isolated each traveler actually becomes, although immense distances separate settlements. An invisible community gradually forms along these routes. Strangers exchange advice. Families share extra food. Hunters warn newcomers about flooded crossings. Travelers leave messages scratched into trees or tucked inside small shelters. Cooperation quietly grows beside independence. The popular image of the lonely frontier often overlooks this reality. Very few people truly survive alone. Around the evening fire, conversation turns toward maps spread across a rough wooden crate. The paper already shows countless folds and water stains. Rivers appear confidently drawn near known settlements, then become uncertain lines farther west. Beyond those lines lies possibility, also risk. You study the fading ink while flames cast shifting light across the page. Every blank area represents more than missing geography. It represents unanswered questions, waiting for someone willing to walk farther than those before. That thought feels strangely peaceful. The Old West will eventually become famous for railroads stretching across mountains, bustling cities rising from prairie grass, and vast ranches covering endless horizons. Yet, none of that future can exist without these first uncertain paths. Trails come before towns. Footsteps come before roads. Curiosity comes before settlement. Everything begins with someone deciding to continue. The rain finally eases. Fresh earth releases its rich scent into the cooling evening air. Frogs begin calling from nearby marshes. Stars slowly appear between drifting clouds. Somewhere beyond the darkness, another trail waits to be discovered, another river to be crossed, another choice to be made. You settle beside the fading fire with the comforting knowledge that tomorrow's road will reveal something entirely new. The frontier is still introducing itself, and you are only beginning to learn its language through careful observation rather than easy certainty. The journey quietly continues. Your mind drifts farther west, where the broad trails gradually narrow into rough mountain paths. The open prairies fall behind, replaced by towering forests, rushing streams, and snow-capped peaks that seem to rise directly from the earth. The air feels cooler here. Every breath carries the clean scent of pine needles, damp stone, and distant water. Sunlight filters through tall branches, leaving shifting patterns across the forest floor. This is the country of the mountain men. Unlike the settlers traveling with entire families, these men often journey alone or in very small groups. They disappear into the wilderness for months at a time, sometimes even years. They carry only what they truly need, knowing that every unnecessary pound becomes another burden on steep trails. Silence becomes their closest companion. The forest itself provides constant conversation. Birds announce unseen visitors. Flowing rivers reveal the easiest routes through difficult valleys. Wind, moving across high ridges, hints at changing weather long before clouds appear overhead. You begin walking beside one of these experienced trappers. His clothing is patched so many times that original fabric has become difficult to recognize. His boots bear the marks of thousands of miles. Around his shoulders hangs a heavy rifle that has clearly served him for many seasons. Every movement appears slow and deliberate, never hurried. Nothing is wasted. Not time, not energy, not food. He pauses beside a muddy creek bank and kneels without speaking. Fresh animal tracks cross the wet ground. To an untrained eye, they appear almost meaningless. To him, they reveal a detailed story. A beaver passed here before sunrise. A deer crossed shortly afterward. Something larger watched from nearby. The wilderness rewards careful attention. It rarely forgives carelessness. During the early 19th century, the demand for beaver pelts drives thousands of trappers into the Rocky Mountains and surrounding regions. Fashion in Europe and Eastern America favors felt hats made from beaver fur, transforming an ordinary animal into one of the most valuable resources on the frontier. Economic forces often travel astonishing distances. A fashionable customer purchasing a hat in Boston or London unknowingly shapes life thousands of miles away in remote western valleys. Research from the University of Chicago has emphasized that the North American fur trade became one of the earliest economic systems linking indigenous communities, European markets, and the expanding United States across enormous geographic distances. What appears to be a simple trade in animal pelts actually influences diplomacy, exploration, settlement, and international competition. Yet historians continue discussing how lasting the mountain men themselves truly were in shaping Western expansion. Some argue they served primarily as temporary economic pioneers, whose influence faded after the fur trade declined. Others believe their geographic knowledge, survival experience, and relationships with native communities permanently opened Western landscapes to later migration. The evidence supports elements of both views. History rarely offers simple conclusions. You continue climbing into higher country. The trail becomes little more than loose rock winding between towering cliffs. Horse hooves strike stone with sharp echoes that bounce across the valley. Snow still lingers beneath shaded trees, although summer has already reached lower elevations. Cold air settles into every fold of your clothing. Even sunshine carries little warmth. Nearby, a narrow stream tumbles over polished granite, its water so clear that every pebble seems magnified beneath the surface. The trapper kneels, cups both hands, and drinks without hesitation. Fresh mountain water tastes remarkably alive. Simple pleasures become unforgettable here. Camp that evening is modest. There are no large wagons, no crowded settlements, only a small fire, carefully hidden among rocks where wind cannot scatter sparks into dry timber. Thin strips of meat roast slowly over glowing coals. The smell is rich but restrained. Food must last until the next successful hunt. Conversation remains equally economical. Mountain men often speak only when necessary. The silence never feels uncomfortable. Instead, it becomes another tool for survival. As darkness settles over the forest, distant sounds begin emerging one by one. An owl calls somewhere beyond the trees. Branches creak softly in the cooling air. Water continues flowing with patient certainty through the valley below. The night never becomes truly quiet. You simply learn to hear it differently. The following morning brings another lesson. Travel here depends upon relationships as much as personal skill. Many mountain men rely upon knowledge shared by native guides, trading partners, and families. They learn which plants offer medicine, which mountain passes remain open during early snowfalls, and which rivers become impassable after spring floods. The frontier is built through exchange. Knowledge passes from person to person just as surely as goods move between trading posts. You arrive at a seasonal gathering known today as a rendezvous. Once each year, trappers, traders, suppliers, and native communities gather to exchange goods, settle accounts, celebrate successful seasons, and prepare for another year in the wilderness. The atmosphere surprises you. Instead of grim isolation, there is laughter. Music drifts across open meadows. Horses graze peacefully nearby, while merchants unpack barrels filled with coffee, cloth, powder, tools, tobacco, cooking equipment, and countless other necessities. Months of loneliness briefly give way to companionship. People greet one another like family reunited after long separation. Stories flow almost as freely as trade. One trapper proudly describes surviving a winter storm that buried his cabin beneath several feet of snow. Another quietly admits that deep loneliness proved harder to endure than hunger. A third carefully unwraps a letter carried hundreds of miles from relatives back east. He reads it 3 times, then folds it just as carefully. Paper weighs almost nothing, yet sometimes it carries an entire world. By afternoon, business resumes. Beaver pelts are examined one by one. Prices rise and fall according to distant markets that few people gathered here will ever personally see. Fortunes change quickly, so do fashions. By the late 1830s and early 1840s, silk hats begin replacing beaver felt in many fashionable circles. Demand gradually declines. The great era of the mountain men slowly fades with surprising speed. Entire ways of life can disappear within a single generation. Some trappers become guides for emigrant wagon trains. Others join military expeditions. Many settle near growing frontier communities. A few simply vanish into the vast western landscape they came to know so well. Their legacy remains larger than their numbers. Long before railroads crossed these mountains, long before surveyors measured every valley, these experienced travelers carried maps inside memory rather than paper. They knew hidden springs, safe river crossings, sheltered campsites, and mountain passes invisible to strangers. Those quiet discoveries would later guide thousands. As evening returns, you climb one final ridge overlooking an endless chain of blue mountains fading into the distance. Golden sunlight touches distant peaks while cool shadows gather below. The wind carries the sharp fragrance of pine resin mixed with cold stone. You pause without speaking. The view seems almost beyond description. For a few peaceful moments. There are no towns, no fences, no telegraph wires, and no railroad tracks stretching across the horizon. Only wilderness, only possibility. The mountain men never truly conquered this landscape. Perhaps no one ever could. Instead, they learned to live within it, respecting both its generosity and its dangers. Their lives remained uncertain, physically demanding, and often painfully lonely. Yet through patience, endurance, and quiet observation, they helped reveal Western geography to a nation still searching for its future. The mountains keep their silence, but they remember every traveler, including you. For a moment, it feels as though the mountains have quietly released you into a different world. The sharp peaks fade behind the horizon, replaced by vast, rolling prairies where the sky seems impossibly large. Grass moves in long, gentle waves beneath a steady breeze, almost like the surface of a calm green ocean. The wind carries the dry scent of sun-warmed earth, crushed wildflowers, and distant rain that has not yet arrived. The landscape appears inviting. It is also demanding. Unlike the mountain men who traveled lightly, you now walk beside families carrying nearly everything they own. Wagons grown beneath furniture, farming tools, barrels of flour, blankets, cooking pots, books, family Bibles, sewing kits, and treasured keepsakes that seem too precious to abandon. Every object tells a story. Every object also adds weight. One young couple pauses beside their wagon before continuing. The husband quietly checks each wheel with practiced hands, running his fingers across the wooden spokes for fresh cracks. His wife gently rocks their sleeping baby while watching clouds gather far away across the prairie. Neither speaks, neither needs to. Their shared silence says enough. Home is no longer a place behind them. It is something they hope to build ahead. Throughout the first half of the 19th century, increasing numbers of settlers begin establishing permanent farms across the expanding American frontier. Rich soil promises opportunity for families willing to endure years of difficult labor. Research from Princeton University has noted that abundant agricultural land became one of the strongest attractions encouraging Western settlement. Although success depended heavily upon weather, transportation, access to markets, and simple perseverance, the promise was genuine. So were the hardships. Your boots sink slightly into soft ground after several days of rain. Wagon wheels leave deep tracks that may remain visible for months. Horses pull steadily despite the growing effort required with every mile. Nobody complains loudly. Energy must be saved. Children walk beside the wagons whenever possible to spare the animals. They gather interesting feathers, smooth stones, and curious flowers during short breaks, turning an exhausting journey into something resembling adventure. Adults see different things. They notice broken axles, clouds moving in unexpected directions, supplies growing smaller, the distance still remaining. Hope and worry travel together. By late afternoon, the family reaches the land they have chosen. There is no welcoming village, no ready-made house, no neatly fenced fields, only open prairie stretching toward every horizon. The father removes his hat and studies the land in thoughtful silence. His daughter kneels to touch the soil between her fingers. It feels dark and rich, crumbling easily in her small hands. Perhaps crops will grow well here, perhaps not. Nobody can guarantee either outcome. The first shelter rises quickly. It is little more than a canvas tent stretched between wooden poles. Rainwater still finds its way inside. Wind slips beneath the edges each night. Yet after weeks of constant travel, simply sleeping in one place feels strangely comforting. Temporary homes often become lasting memories. Soon another challenge appears. There are very few trees, without abundant timber. Traditional log cabins become impossible in many parts of the Great Plains. Families adapt by building homes from thick blocks of prairie sod, cut directly from the earth itself. The work is exhausting. Heavy sections of grass-covered soil are lifted with sharp spades, then stacked carefully like enormous bricks. Roots bind each block together with surprising strength. The walls slowly rise. The roof follows. Before long, what looked like empty prairie contains a shelter. Research from the University of Nebraska has shown that sod houses became practical solutions for thousands of settlers living where lumber remained scarce or prohibitively expensive. Although often remembered humorously today, these homes demonstrated remarkable ingenuity under difficult environmental conditions. Historians continue discussing how comfortable sod houses truly were. Some accounts describe surprisingly cool summers and warm winters because of their thick, insulating walls. Other surviving diaries emphasize leaking roofs, insects, snakes, mice, and constant maintenance. Experiences clearly differed depending upon construction quality, weather, and simple good fortune. Reality usually existed somewhere between ideal and miserable. Inside the new home, daylight enters through a single small window. The floor remains packed earth. Furniture is limited to what could survive the journey west. A wooden table, several chairs, a narrow bed, a rocking cradle. Nothing more is truly necessary. Nothing feels luxurious. Yet, when evening comes, the family gathers together around a simple meal of bread, beans, and salt pork cooked slowly above a small iron stove. The smell fills the room. Simple food never tastes better than after honest labor. Outside, prairie grass whispers endlessly beneath the wind. Coyotes call somewhere beyond the darkness. The vast openness feels almost overwhelming after sunset. The little house suddenly seems very small. The little family suddenly feels very brave. Days settle into steady routines. Before sunrise, water must be carried. Animals require feeding. Fields demand clearing. Fences need building. Every task depends upon the previous one. Progress arrives slowly, sometimes painfully slowly. One afternoon, your attention lingers upon a woman patiently sewing worn clothing beside the doorway, while keeping one eye on children playing nearby. Her hands move with practiced precision despite obvious fatigue. Every stitch extends the life of valuable fabric. Nothing is wasted. Not thread, not flour, not daylight. Her husband spends hours breaking the tough prairie soil with a heavy plow pulled by oxen. Each furrow advances only a little farther than the last. Sweat darkens his shirt despite the cooling breeze. The land gives generously, but only after demanding everything first. Weeks become months. The first small garden begins showing fragile green shoots pushing through dark earth. Children celebrate every new plant as though discovering hidden treasure. Their excitement feels contagious. Growth means survival. Rain becomes both friend and enemy. Gentle showers nourish crops. Violent storms flatten them. Lightning flashes across open skies with breathtaking beauty, followed moments later by thunder rolling endlessly across the plains. Rain hammers the sod roof while everyone waits quietly inside, hoping the walls will hold. Most do. Some do not. Nature remains wonderfully indifferent, despite endless work. Moments of joy quietly appear. Neighbors several miles away gather for harvest celebrations. Someone brings a fiddle. Another family contributes fresh pies. Children invent games across wide fields, while adults exchange seeds. Farming advice and news carried from distant settlements. Community grows gradually, not because life is easy, because life is difficult. Research from the University of California has suggested that cooperation between frontier families often proved essential for long-term survival. Barn raisings, shared harvests, medical assistance, and informal lending networks allowed isolated communities to withstand challenges that individual households could rarely overcome alone. As darkness returns once again, wood smoke rises gently from scattered chimneys across the prairie. Each distant light marks another family attempting the same quiet experiment. To build permanence where almost nothing yet exists. You stand outside the little sod house before turning in for the night. The stars seem brighter than anywhere you have ever known. There are no city lights to soften their brilliance. Only endless sky stretching above endless land. Tomorrow the work begins again. The crops will still need tending. The roof will still require repairs. The dream will still demand patience. The Old West is not shaped only by famous explorers or dramatic battles. It is built one fence post, one furrow, one meal, one ordinary family at a time. And beneath this immense prairie sky, you begin to understand that quiet persistence may be the greatest frontier courage of all. Your thoughts drift across the same broad prairie. Yet the view slowly changes. The scattered homesteads remain behind you, while the land ahead feels older, deeper, and filled with memories that reach far beyond the arrival of wagons and fences. Morning sunlight spreads across rolling grasslands, where immense herds of bison once moved like dark rivers over the earth. Their footsteps shaped the land long before surveyors ever carried measuring chains across these plains. The wind carries familiar scents: dry grass, fresh earth, the faint sweetness of wild sage. Nothing appears unusual, yet every hill has witnessed countless generations living, hunting, celebrating, mourning, and raising children here. You begin to understand an important truth. The American frontier was never an empty stage waiting for new actors. It was already home. Across the Great Plains, the woodlands of the East, the deserts of the Southwest, and the forests of the Northwest. Hundreds of native communities maintained complex societies with distinct languages, traditions, governments, and spiritual beliefs. Some lived in permanent farming villages. Others followed seasonal migrations alongside great animal herds. Many combined agriculture, hunting, fishing, and trade according to local environments. There was no single native experience. Each nation possessed its own history, its own identity, its own future. You walk toward a riverside village where smoke rises gently from cooking fires. Children laugh while chasing one another between carefully built homes. Older people repair tools with patient hands. Nearby, several women prepare dried food that will help sustain families through the coming winter. The atmosphere feels wonderfully ordinary. History often remembers conflict. Daily life usually remembers family. Research from Yale University has emphasized that before large-scale American expansion into the interior, extensive trade and diplomatic relationships already connected native nations across thousands of miles. Copper, shells, stone, food, horses, and crafted goods traveled remarkable distances through well-established exchange networks long before the 19th century. The West was connected, just not in the way later Americans imagined. As you continue, the arrival of horses becomes impossible to overlook. Riders move confidently across open grasslands with extraordinary skill. Within several generations after horses spread across much of the continent, many plains communities adapted their economies, hunting practices, and patterns of movement around this powerful new partnership. The horse transforms daily life. Travel becomes faster. Hunting grows more efficient. Trade expands farther. Communities become increasingly mobile. At the same time, the growing presence of American traders, soldiers, settlers, and government officials gradually reshapes these long-established worlds. Sometimes meetings begin peacefully. Sometimes they end that way. Sometimes they do not. A small trading post stands beside a river crossing where people from different backgrounds gather throughout the year. Blankets, iron tools, cooking kettles, cloth, firearms, and food pass from hand to hand. Conversations require patience, gestures, trusted interpreters, and mutual respect. Trust grows slowly. It can disappear quickly. One elderly trader quietly admits that successful business depends less upon bargaining than reputation. If promises are broken once, future opportunities often vanish with them. Honor carries practical value. Even on the frontier, your attention shifts toward a council gathering beneath broad cottonwood trees. Leaders speak carefully while younger listeners remain respectfully silent. Decisions affecting entire communities are rarely rushed. Every word matters. Every agreement carries consequences. Modern historians have increasingly emphasized that native diplomacy during this period required remarkable political skill. Relationships extended not only between indigenous nations themselves, but also with European powers and the expanding United States, each pursuing different goals across changing circumstances. The political landscape was extraordinarily complex. Simple stories rarely capture it. Historians continue debating the extent to which particular native nations believed lasting coexistence with expanding American settlement remained possible during the early 19th century. Some scholars argue that many leaders sincerely pursued accommodation whenever practical opportunities appeared. Others suggest that growing demographic pressure made long-term coexistence increasingly difficult, regardless of diplomatic intentions. The surviving evidence reflects both hope and uncertainty. Different communities faced different realities. By afternoon, you notice another quiet change across the landscape. Bison herds appear less frequently. Hunting grounds begin shifting. Trails once used freely now intersect with newly established settlements. Small changes accumulate. Eventually, they reshape entire lives. Near the edge of a broad plain, you meet a young boy helping his grandfather repair a simple bow. The older man's hands move steadily despite their age. He pauses often, not because he has forgotten the work, but because he explains each step carefully. Knowledge passes gently, one generation at a time. The boy listens without interruption. Years from now, he may remember this afternoon more clearly than any formal lesson. Simple moments often preserve entire cultures. Evening approaches beneath glowing skies painted with shades of gold and soft orange. Families gather around cooking fires as the smell of roasted meat and fresh bread drifts through the cool air. Laughter rises from nearby children, while older relatives quietly exchange stories remembered across many winters. The warmth feels familiar, no matter who shares it. You realize that ordinary hopes remain surprisingly universal. Parents worry about children. Grandparents treasure memories. Young people dream about tomorrow. Communities celebrate successful harvests. Families mourn loved ones. Across cultures, humanity often looks more alike than different. Yet outside the peaceful circle of firelight, larger forces continue gathering. Government officials negotiate new treaties. Surveyors measure additional land. Settlers continue arriving. Military forts appear along important routes. The pace of change steadily increases. Many native leaders recognize what this means. Some seek peaceful agreements. Others prepare to defend traditional homelands. Many attempt both at different moments, responding to circumstances that shift year after year. There are no easy choices, only difficult ones. Research from the University of California has highlighted how rapidly environmental and economic pressures transformed native communities during the 19th century. Population movement, changing trade relationships, disease, military expansion, and declining wildlife combined to create challenges rarely experienced separately. The pressures reinforced one another. That made adaptation extraordinarily difficult. As darkness settles across the prairie, distant wolves begin calling beneath a sky filled with brilliant stars. Cool air carries the scent of river water mixed with fresh grass after sunset. Somewhere nearby, a mother quietly hums a gentle melody while rocking a child to sleep. It is a peaceful sound. You pause for a long reflective moment. History often becomes divided into winners and losers, settlers and native peoples, progress and resistance. Yet, standing here, such simple categories begin to fade. Real people lived through these years without knowing how history would eventually describe them. They only knew today. Tomorrow remained uncertain. The choices before them were immediate, deeply personal, and rarely obvious. As you prepare to continue westward, you carry with you a quieter understanding of the frontier. Every new cabin built by one family often represented profound change for another. Every newly marked trail crossed landscapes already rich with memory. Every hopeful beginning sometimes became someone else's painful ending. The Old West cannot be understood honestly without holding these truths together. Its story is not one voice. It is many voices sharing the same vast horizon. And beneath the endless prairie sky, those voices still seem to echo softly whenever the wind moves through the grass. The prairie stretches before you once again, but now it feels busier than before. What once seemed like isolated travelers has become a slow-moving river of wagons, horses, oxen, and determined people. Dust rises gently beneath countless wooden wheels, drifting into the warm afternoon air before settling across hats, blankets, and weathered faces. The road is alive, not with speed, with persistence. You join one of the great wagon trains heading west. The line extends farther than you can comfortably see, disappearing over gentle hills before emerging again in the distance. Every wagon carries a different story. Some belong to young couples beginning married life. Others shelter grandparents, whose hands still remember farms left behind decades earlier. Children peek from beneath canvas covers, their curiosity stronger than their exhaustion. Nobody travels exactly the same journey. Everyone shares the same uncertain road. The creaking of wagon wheels becomes almost musical after several days. At first, the sound seems irritating, but gradually it settles into a steady rhythm, like the slow ticking of an enormous clock measuring miles instead of minutes. The prairie teaches patience. Nothing happens quickly here. Each morning begins before sunrise. The camp slowly comes alive as cooking fires flicker against the fading darkness. Someone grinds coffee beans between heavy stones. Another traveler kneads bread beside a wooden crate serving as a makeshift table. Oxen snort softly while being harnessed for another day's work. The smell of wood smoke drifts through the cool air. Fresh bread follows soon after. Simple breakfasts become treasured moments because everyone knows the day's labor has not yet begun. One elderly woman quietly pours the first cup of coffee for her husband before preparing one for herself. They exchange only a brief smile. No words are necessary. After 40 years together, kindness has become routine. Those ordinary gestures often survive longer than grand declarations. The great overland migrations accelerate during the 1840s and 1850s as increasing numbers of Americans follow routes such as the Oregon Trail, the California Trail, and the Mormon Trail. Hundreds of thousands of immigrants eventually cross the continent seeking farmland, religious freedom, commercial opportunity, or the promise of a different future. Research from the University of Oxford has emphasized that these migrations represented one of the largest voluntary overland population movements in 19th century history, requiring remarkable logistical planning despite the limited transportation available. The journey demanded far more than courage. It demanded organization. Food supplies had to be carefully calculated. Livestock required constant attention. Spare wagon parts became priceless after mechanical failures. Every family learned that forgetting one essential tool could create weeks of hardship. Preparation often determined survival. As the morning advances, the wagon train reaches a broad river. The current appears calm from a distance, yet experienced guides remain cautious. Water hides its true strength beneath the surface. Everyone stops. The crossing cannot be rushed. Some wagons will float with careful preparation. Others must be pulled slowly through shallow sections. Livestock hesitate at the water's edge before finally stepping forward. Children suddenly become very quiet. Parents watch every movement. A single mistake here could destroy months of planning. You notice one young father removing treasured books from his wagon before sealing them inside waterproof cloth. He smiles gently at his daughter, pretending this is merely another ordinary task. She believes him, at least for now. The crossing succeeds, though not without difficulty. One wagon loses a wheel in deep mud. Several barrels drift downstream before being recovered. Everyone emerges wet, tired, and deeply relieved. Small victories matter. The trail continues. Modern historians estimate that while many emigrants successfully completed the journey, thousands died along the western trails from illness, accidents, exposure, or other hardships. Research from Stanford University has shown that disease, particularly illnesses spread within crowded wagon camps, posed a greater threat than dramatic attacks so often emphasized in popular stories. Reality proves quieter, yet no less dangerous. Historians continue discussing exactly how emigrants perceived the risks they faced before departure. Some surviving diaries suggest families understood the dangers remarkably well. Others indicate that optimistic letters from earlier settlers sometimes encouraged unrealistic expectations. Personal experiences varied enormously. Hope often outweighed caution. Sometimes that hope proved justified. Sometimes it did not. By midday, the trail climbs gently toward the higher ground. From the crest of a broad hill, you look back across miles of wagons stretched like a pale ribbon through the prairie grass. The sight is breathtaking. Hundreds of lives moving together, hundreds of separate dreams sharing one direction. Nearby, children gather around a woman reading aloud from a worn storybook during the lunch break. Dust covers its leather binding, yet the pages remain carefully protected. Stories travel well. They require little space. One little boy listens so intently that he forgets to finish his meal. His mother quietly laughs before reminding him that imagination alone cannot fill an empty stomach. He grins sheepishly, then returns to both. As afternoon heat settles across the plains, conversations become less frequent. Everyone saves energy. Wagon wheels continue turning beneath the relentless sun, while insects hum through tall grass on either side of the trail. The rhythm becomes almost hypnotic. Step, wheel, hoof, breath. Again, again, again. Late in the day, dark clouds gather unexpectedly from the northwest. The wind changes direction with surprising speed. Canvas covers snap sharply against wooden frames as people hurry to secure loose equipment. The storm arrives without ceremony. Rain lashes across the open prairie, soaking clothing within moments. Thunder rolls overhead with immense power while lightning briefly illuminates the entire landscape. The wagons circle together, not for romance, for protection. Families huddle beneath canvas, while water runs through deepening ruts between the wheels. Horses stand patiently with lowered heads, their wet coats glistening beneath flashes of light. The storm feels endless. Eventually it passes. It always does. When evening finally returns, the air smells wonderfully clean. Wet earth releases a rich fragrance that seems to erase the day's dust. Tiny frogs begin calling from puddles left by the rain. Somewhere nearby, someone starts playing a fiddle. The melody spreads quietly through camp. People smile. Children dance briefly in the soft mud before parents gently guide them toward bed. Laughter returns. That matters more than anyone admits. Around the evening fire, travelers exchange stories gathered from others farther along the trail. They speak of fertile valleys beyond the mountains, rivers filled with fish, orchards already producing fruit, and towns slowly growing where only wilderness stood a few years earlier. Perhaps every story is perfectly true. Perhaps each has grown slightly with every retelling. Dreams often improve through repetition before lying down for the night. You gaze upward at a sky overflowing with stars. The vastness above mirrors the vastness surrounding you. Tomorrow will bring more miles, more crossings, more uncertainty, and more quiet determination. You realize something almost comforting. The trail itself is slowly changing everyone who walks it. Patience grows stronger. Fear becomes manageable. Neighbors become friends. Ordinary people discover resilience they never suspected they possessed. The destination still lies far ahead. Yet, perhaps the journey itself has already begun, transforming the lives that travel upon it. The wagons rest. The prairie breathes. And beneath the endless western sky, another peaceful night settles across the long road toward tomorrow. Your breathing settles into the steady rhythm of the trail until, almost without warning, the landscape begins to change once again. The endless prairies gradually give way to rolling foothills. Rivers run faster here, tumbling over polished stones that sparkle beneath the morning sun. Pine forests appear more frequently, their cool shade offering welcome relief after long days beneath open skies. The air feels different. It carries anticipation. Travelers no longer speak only of fertile farmland. Now they whisper about gold. The word spreads quietly at first, almost like an unbelievable rumor shared beside evening campfires. One traveler claims to have seen tiny yellow flakes shining in a mountain stream. Another insists that ordinary laborers have become wealthy almost overnight. Someone else dismisses the stories entirely, convinced they are nothing more than hopeful exaggerations. Nobody knows what to believe. Everyone wants to believe something. Then the rumors become impossible to ignore. In 1848, gold is discovered at a sawmill in California. The news spread slowly at first, but by the following year, it has reached towns, ports, and villages across the United States and far beyond. Newspapers print astonishing accounts. Merchants repeat every fresh report. Ships fill with passengers heading west. Wagon trains grow larger with every passing month. Research from Columbia University has highlighted that the California Gold Rush became one of the most dramatic migration events in American history, rapidly transforming California from a distant frontier into a center of international commerce and settlement. The discovery changes everything, almost overnight. Your footsteps now carry you toward a mining camp nestled beside a cold mountain stream. Before reaching it, you hear the settlement long before you see it. Axes strike fresh timber. Hammers ring against iron. Voices echo through the valley. Dogs bark. Mules bray impatiently. The quiet wilderness has become remarkably noisy. As you enter the camp, the smell of pine resin mixes with smoke from dozens of cooking fires. Freshly cut logs lie stacked beside rough cabins built with astonishing speed. Canvas tents fill every open space between the trees. Mud covers nearly every path, churned endlessly by boots, wagon wheels, and pack animals. Nothing appears permanent. Everything appears urgent. A man kneels beside the stream, swirling gravel inside a shallow metal pan. He repeats the same careful motion again and again, allowing lighter sand to wash away while heavier particles remain at the bottom. His movements are slow, patient, hopeful. Each pan may reveal nothing or everything. Nearby, another miner examines a tiny golden speck resting in his palm. It weighs almost nothing. Yet, his smile suggests he has discovered a treasure beyond imagination. Gold has extraordinary power, not only because of its value, because of what people believe it promises. Many who arrive here have left comfortable lives behind. Farmers abandon fields. Shopkeepers close businesses. Sailors desert ships. Teachers, carpenters, lawyers, blacksmiths, and laborers all arrive carrying the same dream. Perhaps fortune waits just beneath the next layer of gravel. Perhaps tomorrow will change everything. Most dreams prove less generous. The reality of mining is physically exhausting. Ice-cold water numbs hands within minutes. Backs ache after endless hours of bending over streams. Heavy tools must be carried through difficult terrain. Food often costs astonishing prices because every sack of flour, every barrel of salt pork, and every cooking pot has traveled enormous distances. A loaf of bread becomes precious. So does a fresh egg. Opportunity creates inflation as quickly as it creates excitement. Historians continue debating how many miners actually became wealthy during the gold rush. Some economic historians argue that merchants, transport companies, and suppliers often earned more consistent profits than individual prospectors. Others note that although spectacular discoveries were rare, thousands of miners still improved their financial circumstances compared with opportunities available elsewhere. The famous success stories existed. So did countless disappointments. History remembers both, as afternoon sunlight filters through tall pines. You wander farther into the settlement. Small businesses already line the muddy streets. A barber offers haircuts beneath a simple canvas awning. A baker proudly displays fresh loaves still warm from the oven. A woman operates a laundry service beside the river, her hands red from hours spent washing clothing in freezing water. Gold creates more than miners. It creates entire communities. Research from the University of California has emphasized that the gold rush accelerated urban development, commercial investment, and transportation infrastructure throughout California. Towns expanded rapidly. Ports grew busier, and new industries emerged to support the enormous influx of newcomers. The frontier becomes an economy, not merely a destination. Inside a modest general store, shelves overflow with tools, lanterns, blankets, coffee, dried beans, candles, and sturdy boots. The owner smiles warmly while recording every sale in a thick ledger. He never swings a pickaxe. Yet his business prospers steadily. Sometimes the safest fortune lies beside the goldfields rather than within them. As evening approaches, miners slowly return from surrounding hills carrying picks, shovels, and empty pans. Some wear expressions of quiet satisfaction. Others stare silently at the ground, unwilling to discuss another fruitless day. Failure becomes common here. So does resilience. One elderly prospector sits alone outside his cabin, carefully polishing a small pocket watch that no longer keeps perfect time. It belonged to his father. He carries it not because it is valuable, but because it reminds him that life contains more than sudden wealth. The gesture feels unexpectedly moving. Memory often outweighs money. Nearby, several children chase one another between cabins, laughing loudly as though they have forgotten entirely that adults around them spend every waking hour searching for precious metal. Their joy feels wonderfully ordinary. Even boomtowns require childhood. Night settles gently over the valley. Campfires flicker beneath towering trees while distant voices drift through the cool mountain air. Someone begins playing a fiddle near the largest tent. Others quietly join in singing familiar songs from homes scattered across the continent. For a little while, loneliness retreats. Community takes its place. You notice that people from remarkably different backgrounds now share the same settlement. Americans from eastern states work beside immigrants from Europe, Latin America, Asia, and other regions of the world. Languages differ. Customs differ. Ambitions remain surprisingly similar. Everyone seeks opportunity. Everyone hopes tomorrow may bring better fortune. The camp itself feels temporary. Yet, many of these settlements will eventually become lasting towns and cities. Schools will replace tents. Churches will stand where rough cabins now lean. Brick buildings will rise where muddy paths currently wind between tree stumps. Few people realize this yet. They believe they are chasing gold. In many ways, they are building a future. You stand beside the rushing stream one final time before resting for the night. Moonlight glimmers softly across the moving water. Tiny flecks of sand sparkle beneath the current, tempting every imagination. Perhaps gold still waits there, perhaps not. Either way, the discovery has already transformed the American West forever. The mountains remain unchanged. The rivers continue flowing, but the people crossing them never will. Your thoughts continue forward with the flow of the river. leaving the noisy mining camp behind as fresh settlements begin appearing across the landscape. Some are little more than a cluster of wooden buildings gathered around a dusty crossroads. Others already contain busy streets, workshops, boarding houses, and stores whose windows glow warmly after sunset. They have one thing in common: they are growing faster than anyone expected. The speed of that growth creates a quiet problem. Communities appear almost overnight. Laws do not. As you walk into another frontier town, the first thing you notice is not the buildings themselves, but the sound. Hammers strike fresh lumber from every direction. Horses move constantly through muddy streets. Wagons arrive carrying supplies, while others depart loaded with hides, grain, or mining equipment. The town never seems entirely still. Even before breakfast, people hurry toward another day's work. A carpenter balances carefully on the frame of a new hotel. A baker removes steaming loaves from his brick oven. The smell of fresh bread drifts through the crisp morning air, briefly overpowering the odors of horses, damp wood, and coal smoke. Life feels energetic, almost optimistic. Yet beneath that optimism lies uncertainty. Who settles disputes when neighbors disagree? Who protects property? Who investigates theft? Who decides guilt or innocence? The questions become more urgent as towns continue expanding. In older eastern cities, government institutions have developed gradually across generations. Here on the frontier, thousands of newcomers arrive long before permanent legal systems become fully organized. Order must catch up with opportunity. Sometimes it struggles to do so. Research from the University of Chicago has noted that many Western communities rapidly established local governments, elected sheriffs, appointed judges, and created courts soon after settlement began. Contrary to popular legend, most frontier residents actively sought stability because successful businesses and growing families depended upon predictable law rather than constant violence. The famous gunfights existed. They were not everyday life. That distinction matters. You pause outside a modest courthouse built from rough timber. It lacks the impressive architecture found in eastern capitals. Yet, its purpose feels every bit as important. Inside, a judge listens patiently while two neighboring farmers argue over a property boundary. Neither man raises his voice. Neither carries dramatic resentment. They simply disagree. The case concerns a fence placed several yards beyond what one family believes is the correct line. History is often built upon such ordinary conflicts. The judge studies handwritten surveys before quietly announcing his decision. One farmer nods with visible disappointment. The other offers no celebration. They shake hands, then return to work. Justice, when it succeeds, often appears remarkably uneventful. Outside, the town sheriff slowly rides along the main street. His horse walks rather than trots. He greets shopkeepers by name. Children wave as he passes. An elderly woman asks him to help recover several wandering pigs before they damage her vegetable garden. He smiles, then agrees. His day includes far more lost livestock than dangerous criminals. Popular stories rarely mention that. As afternoon sunlight warms the streets, your attention shifts toward the blacksmith shop. Sparks burst into the air with every strike of the heavy hammer. The smell of hot iron blends with burning coal while customers wait patiently for repaired wagon parts. Horseshoes, farming tools, and broken hinges. Reliable craftsmanship becomes another form of law. Communities depend upon people keeping promises. One customer quietly pays for repairs, using carefully counted coins wrapped inside a handkerchief. The blacksmith examines neither the amount nor the customer. Trust has already been established. That trust carries enormous value. Historians continue debating whether the American frontier truly experienced higher levels of violence than older eastern communities during the 19th century. Some researchers argue that homicide rates were elevated in certain boom towns experiencing rapid population growth. Others suggest that later novels and films exaggerated violence. creating lasting myths that overshadowed ordinary daily life. The historical picture remains complex. Different towns experienced very different realities. You continue walking toward the local newspaper office. The building appears surprisingly modest. Inside, however, heavy printing presses work steadily as ink stains nearly every surface. Fresh newspapers emerge one page at a time. They carry announcements, market prices, political debates, births, marriages, obituaries, advertisements. Communities begin defining themselves through shared information. A free press proves just as important as a courthouse. Nearby, a schoolhouse stands beside a freshly planted row of young trees. Children's voices drift through the open windows while a teacher patiently writes arithmetic problems across a slate board. The future quietly takes shape, one lesson at a time. Research from Stanford University has highlighted that educational institutions spread rapidly throughout many Western settlements, despite difficult conditions. Families often considered schools essential signs that temporary camps were becoming permanent communities. Parents wanted more than survival. They wanted continuity toward evening. A disagreement suddenly erupts outside the general store. Two freight team drivers argue over the delivery of damaged cargo. Voices rise. Several bystanders pause. Nobody reaches for a weapon. Instead, older residents quietly separate the men before suggesting they settle the matter before the local justice the following morning. The tension fades almost as quickly as it appeared. The crowd disperses. Business resumes. Conflict exists. So does restraint. One elderly shopkeeper later remarks that a town earns its reputation not by avoiding disagreements, but by resolving them fairly. His words linger. Communities grow stronger through patience. As dusk settles across the streets, lanterns begin appearing one by one inside shop windows. Their warm glow reflects softly across muddy roads still marked by wagon wheels from earlier in the day. The smell of supper fills the air. Roasted chicken, fresh biscuits, vegetable stew, simple meals after honest work. Families gather around wooden tables, while children eagerly describe everything they witnessed since sunrise. A little girl proudly announces that she can now write her full name without help. Her father smiles with unmistakable pride before asking her to demonstrate. She writes carefully. Each letter matters. Learning feels quietly triumphant. Farther down the street, several merchants close their stores before locking the doors. Cash boxes disappear beneath counters. Window shutters swing gently closed. Another ordinary day ends. Another ordinary day has strengthened the town. You realize that history often remembers frontier settlements for their most dramatic moments. Yet the true foundation of these communities lies elsewhere. It lies inside classrooms, courtrooms, workshops, churches, markets, dinner tables, places where people choose cooperation more often than conflict. The Old West certainly knew violence, but it also knew responsibility, compromise, neighborliness. The quieter virtues rarely attract legends. They build civilizations. Night finally settles over the town. Crickets begin singing beneath clear skies, while distant church bells gently mark the passing hour. Cool evening air carries the scent of wood smoke from dozens of chimneys rising together into the darkness. The frontier no longer feels like a collection of temporary camps. It is becoming something lasting, not because everyone agrees, because enough people decide that living together requires rules, trust, and shared purpose. The stars shine silently overhead. Below them, another western town slowly grows into tomorrow. In your ears, the echo of busy streets gradually fades until it is replaced by a different rhythm. Hooves strike the earth in steady patterns. Leather creaks with every movement of the saddle. Somewhere ahead, hundreds of cattle shift together, their low calls drifting across the open range beneath a pale morning sky. The prairie feels alive again, not with wagon trains, with herds. You find yourself riding beside a group of cowboys preparing for another long day on the trail. The first light of dawn stretches across the grasslands while a thin layer of mist clings to the shallow valleys. Horses breathe slowly in the cool air, their warm breath briefly visible before disappearing into the morning. Nobody rushes. The animals set the pace. Each rider checks saddle straps, reins, and bedrolls with practiced care. A loose buckle may seem insignificant in camp, yet dozens of miles from the nearest settlement, it can become a serious problem. Preparation is a quiet habit. The West rewards those who remember small details. One young cowboy removes a pebble from his horse's hoof before mounting. He pats the animal gently along its neck. The horse relaxes. So does he. Trust grows through countless ordinary moments. The image of the cowboy eventually becomes one of the most enduring symbols of the American West. Yet the daily reality is far removed from the dramatic scenes that later appear in novels and films. Most cowboys spend long hours tending livestock, repairing fences, watching for injured animals, and riding slowly across immense stretches of grassland. The work is repetitive. It is also essential. Research from Princeton University has emphasized that the cattle industry became a major economic force after the American Civil War, especially as expanding railroads connected western ranches with growing markets in the eastern United States. The famous cattle drives represented only one part of a much larger agricultural economy built upon ranching, transportation, and trade. The legend grows later. The labor comes first. You ride alongside the herd as the sun climbs higher into the sky. Thousands of cattle move with surprising patience, though every rider understands how quickly calm can disappear. A sudden thunderstorm, an unexpected noise, a frightened animal. Any of these may trigger a stampede capable of scattering the entire herd. Everyone remains alert. Without appearing tense, the trail stretches ahead across rolling grasslands dotted with wildflowers. Meadowlarks sing from fence posts while hawks glide silently overhead. The scent of dry grass mixes with horse sweat and well-worn leather. It is a hard-working smell, not an unpleasant one. Around midday, the cowboys pause beside a shallow creek. Horses lower their heads eagerly toward the cool water. The riders remove hats, splash water across dusty faces, and sit beneath scattered cottonwood trees. Lunch is simple: beans, salt pork, fresh bread if supplies remain generous, strong coffee. Nobody complains about the menu. Hunger improves appreciation. One older cowboy quietly unwraps a letter folded carefully inside an oilskin pouch. The paper has already been read dozens of times. He smiles faintly before placing it back inside his coat. Home travels with him, only in different form. Nearby, a younger rider practices tying knots with a length of rope while listening closely to advice from a more experienced hand. Skills pass quietly, one generation to another. There is no classroom. The prairie itself becomes the teacher. Historians continue debating how accurately popular culture has represented cowboy life. Some scholars argue that 20th century entertainment greatly romanticized the profession, emphasizing adventure while overlooking demanding physical labor. Others suggest that although many stories became exaggerated, they still reflected genuine qualities of independence, resilience, and horsemanship valued by working ranchers. The truth includes both reality and myth. As history often does, the afternoon brings stronger winds sweeping across the plains. Dust rises gently around the herd, softening the distant horizon until land and sky almost blend together. Then, one steer suddenly breaks away, without hesitation. Two riders guide their horses into motion. They do not chase wildly. Instead, they move calmly to redirect the animal before panic spreads through the rest of the herd. The correction lasts only moments. Experience replaces excitement. Watching them, you realize that successful cowboys often avoid dramatic action rather than seeking it. Good judgment prevents emergencies. Late in the day, dark clouds begin forming far to the west. Their shadows creep slowly across the prairie. Everyone notices. Nobody speaks immediately. The herd senses the changing weather before the first gust of wind arrives. Animals bunch closer together. Horses lift their heads toward the distant thunder. The storm approaches steadily. Rain finally arrives in broad sweeping sheets, drumming against hats and slickers while lightning flashes across the open sky. The riders continue working with quiet determination, keeping the herd moving without unnecessary haste. Wet leather becomes heavy. Boots fill with water. Cold rain runs beneath collars. Still, the work continues. Research from the University of California has shown that weather posed one of the greatest challenges during long cattle drives. Flooded rivers, drought, severe storms, and harsh winters often shaped ranching success far more than famous confrontations between people. Nature remained the greatest opponent, and occasionally the greatest ally. By sunset, the storm has passed. Warm, golden light breaks through the retreating clouds, illuminating the soaked prairie with remarkable beauty. Every blade of grass seems to shimmer. The herd settles peacefully. So do the riders. Camp is established beside a gentle stream. Horses graze nearby while supper cooks slowly over a crackling fire. Someone begins playing a harmonica. The melody is soft, almost hesitant, carried gently across the cooling evening air. Conversation remains unhurried. Stories drift from one rider to another. One recalls an unusually harsh winter. Another remembers driving cattle through waist-deep snow. Someone else laughs about a stubborn mule that repeatedly escaped camp. Ordinary memories become treasured entertainment. A young cowboy quietly admits that what he misses most is not comfortable beds or fine meals. It is hearing his mother's voice. Nobody laughs. Several others nod silently. The frontier often demands distance from those you love. As darkness settles over the prairie, countless stars emerge across the immense western sky. The fire burns lower while horses stand peacefully beyond the circle of light. You lean back against your saddle, now serving as a pillow. The ground feels firm. The night feels endless. The work has been demanding, yet strangely satisfying. You begin to understand why the cowboy became such a lasting symbol. Not because every day brought danger, but because every day required responsibility. These riders cared for living creatures across vast landscapes, where patience mattered more than pride. Tomorrow the herd will continue north. The trail will continue with it, and beneath the quiet stars of the American West, another ordinary day of extraordinary endurance comes gently to its close. Your mind follows the cattle trail until it slowly begins to intersect with something entirely new. At first, you hear only a faint metallic sound carried by the morning breeze. It comes in slow, steady intervals, almost like a distant heartbeat. Then the sound grows stronger. Iron strikes iron. Hammers echo across open country. Men call instructions to one another while teams of horses pull enormous wooden beams into place. The railroad has arrived. The frontier is changing again. You stand on a gentle rise overlooking a construction camp that stretches across the valley below. Canvas tents line the edge of the work site. Smoke curls upward from field kitchens where cooks prepare breakfast before sunrise. Long stacks of timber wait beside neat piles of steel rails that glimmer softly beneath the first light of day. Everything appears organized. Everything moves with purpose. The smell of fresh cut pine fills the cool air. Nearby, blacksmiths shape glowing spikes, while carpenters measure railroad ties with remarkable precision. The rhythmic ringing of heavy hammers becomes almost hypnotic. Strike, lift, strike again. Progress arrives one spike at a time. One young worker wipes sweat from his forehead before carefully lifting another rail into position with the help of several companions. Nobody could accomplish the task alone. Strength matters. Coordination matters more. The construction of the Transcontinental Railroad during the 19th century becomes one of the greatest engineering achievements in American history. Thousands of laborers, including large numbers of immigrants, work under demanding conditions to connect eastern and western rail networks across mountains, deserts, and broad plains. Research from Stanford University has emphasized that the completion of the railroad dramatically reduced travel time across the continent while accelerating trade, migration, communication, and economic development. Distances did not disappear. They simply became manageable. You walk carefully beside the unfinished tracks. Fresh wooden ties release the clean scent of sap beneath the warming sun. Steel rails stretch toward the horizon, disappearing around distant hills before reappearing as thin silver lines. The track seems almost alive. Each completed mile invites another. Nearby, surveyors stand quietly over detailed maps spread across a folding table. They compare measurements, elevations, and river crossings before marking careful adjustments with sharpened pencils. Every curve matters. Every bridge requires planning. The landscape cannot simply be ignored. It must be understood. Historians continue debating whether the railroad represented primarily an inevitable technological advance or whether government policies and financial incentives proved equally decisive in shaping its rapid expansion. Some scholars emphasize private entrepreneurship. Others highlight the crucial role of federal land grants and public investment. Both perspectives contribute important pieces. History often advances through cooperation between public ambition and private initiative. By midday, the construction camp feels almost like a small town. A doctor treats minor injuries beneath a canvas shelter. Merchants sell tools, clothing, tobacco, and fresh vegetables delivered by wagon. Laundry hangs drying between tents while children play beside piles of neatly stacked lumber. Families live here too, not only workers. One little girl proudly carries a bucket of water toward her mother's cooking fire. She walks slowly, concentrating so carefully that only a few drops spill onto the dusty ground. Her father smiles as she arrives. She has helped. That is enough. Simple acts of contribution build confidence. The afternoon brings another remarkable sight. Farther along the completed section of track, a locomotive slowly approaches. At first, only a faint whistle reaches your ears. Then comes the steady rhythm of wheels meeting rails. Steam rises into the bright blue sky while polished metal reflects flashes of sunlight. The machine feels enormous, almost unbelievable. People pause their work to watch it pass. Some remove their hats. Others simply stand in thoughtful silence. A few older settlers remember when crossing these same distances required months of exhausting travel by wagon. Now the train covers them in days. The change feels almost magical. Yet the transformation reaches far beyond transportation. Towns begin appearing wherever stations are built. Grain can now reach distant markets before spoiling. Mail arrives with unprecedented speed. Newspapers carry fresh information instead of months-old reports. Ideas begin traveling almost as quickly as people. Research from the University of Chicago has shown that railroads fundamentally reshaped settlement patterns throughout the American West. Communities connected by rail often flourished economically, while others bypassed by new routes sometimes declined despite earlier success. Fortune followed the tracks, sometimes unexpectedly. As evening approaches, you visit one of the newly established railroad towns. The streets are noticeably busier than many frontier settlements you have already explored. Hotels welcome travelers arriving by train. Warehouses stand beside loading platforms stacked with barrels, crates, livestock, and farm equipment waiting for shipment. Commerce never seems to rest. Every arriving train brings opportunity. Inside the station, a telegraph operator sits before a compact machine, clicking steadily with mysterious rhythm. Messages travel across wires stretching beside the railroad for hundreds of miles. Words now outrun horses. That alone changes history. A merchant receives news that an eastern shipment of tools has departed 3 days earlier. Another learns current grain prices before deciding whether to sell immediately or wait another week. Information becomes valuable cargo, sometimes more valuable than gold. One elderly traveler quietly unfolds a timetable before studying the printed arrival hours with visible amazement. He shakes his head gently. Not long ago, such precision would have seemed impossible. The world has become smaller, not physically, practically, as dusk settles over the station. Lanterns illuminate the platforms with warm golden light. Steam drifts lazily from the waiting locomotive while passengers gather belongings before boarding. A young mother embraces her grown son one final time before he departs east to attend college. Neither speaks for several moments. Distance no longer feels permanent. The train makes farewell both easier and harder. Nearby, freight workers carefully load crates of apples, wool, leather, and canned goods into waiting rail cars. Every shipment represents months of labor by farmers, ranchers, craftsmen, and merchants scattered across the frontier. The railroad connects them all in ways few fully appreciate. You pause beside the tracks after the final evening departure. The locomotive whistle fades slowly into the darkness until only crickets and the soft rustling of prairie grass remain. Silence returns. Different now. The railroad has not erased the frontier. It has transformed it. Journeys that once required remarkable endurance now become ordinary travel. Remote settlements grow into thriving towns. Businesses expand beyond local markets. Families separated by great distances exchange letters with growing regularity. The pace of life begins changing. So does the meaning of distance. The Old West is entering another chapter, not by abandoning its past, by laying steel across it, and beneath a sky filled once again with quiet stars. The rails stretch onward into tomorrow, carrying with them the hopes, ambitions, and everyday lives of a nation still discovering itself. Your attention follows the railroad until the steady rhythm of steel wheels slowly fades into the distance. The tracks continue toward growing towns and busy markets. Yet your path now turns back toward the wide plains where the open grass seems to stretch beyond the reach of every horizon. The wind moves gently through the prairie, carrying the scent of dry earth, wild sage, and distant rain. The land itself has not changed. The people upon it have. The years pass quietly. Yet the pace of settlement continues to increase. More homesteads appear beside rivers. New ranches spread across the grasslands. Military forts become familiar landmarks along important trails. Telegraph wires cross country that only a generation earlier had seemed unimaginably distant. Opportunity continues advancing. So do tension and uncertainty. You ride beside a supply wagon traveling toward one of the frontier forts. The horses pull steadily beneath the afternoon sun, while wooden crates filled with flour, medical supplies, horseshoes, blankets, and tools shift gently with every mile. The driver speaks little. He has traveled this road many times. Routine creates confidence. Still, he glances occasionally toward the distant hills. Old habits remain useful. The fort itself appears gradually on the horizon. It is not an enormous stone fortress like those imagined in old stories. Instead, it consists of sturdy wooden buildings surrounded by corrals, workshops, storage sheds, and simple defensive walls where necessary. Its purpose is practical: protection, communication, supply. The soldiers stationed here spend surprisingly little time in battle. Most of their daily routine resembles ordinary labor. Horses require feeding and grooming. Buildings demand constant repair. Equipment must be cleaned, inspected, and maintained. Patrols ride long distances simply to observe changing conditions across the surrounding countryside. Military life includes much waiting and much preparation. Research from Yale University has emphasized that frontier forts often served as administrative, logistical, and communication centers in addition to their military responsibilities. They became gathering places for travelers, traders, government officials, and nearby communities as much as defensive positions. Their influence extended beyond warfare. They represented growing federal presence across the expanding West. You notice one young soldier carefully writing a letter beneath the shade of a wooden porch. His handwriting remains neat despite the rough table beneath his paper. He pauses often, searching for the right words. Perhaps he wishes to reassure his parents. Perhaps he misses home more than he admits. The letter will travel hundreds of miles before reaching them. Paper carries remarkable emotional weight. Outside the fort, life continues much as before. Ranchers drive cattle across familiar grazing lands. Farmers inspect growing crops. Children attend small schools built from local timber. Yet beneath these ordinary routines, larger changes continue unfolding. Many native nations see increasing numbers of settlers entering lands they have long considered home. Promises made through treaties become subjects of disagreement. Boundaries shift. Resources grow more contested. Trust becomes increasingly difficult to maintain. Historians generally agree that conflict across the Great Plains developed through a complex combination of expanding settlement, government policy, economic pressure, military campaigns, environmental change, and competing understandings of land ownership. No single event explains the growing tensions. History rarely moves through one cause alone. It unfolds through many connected decisions. As you continue riding across the prairie, you encounter a small group of Army scouts returning from a long patrol. Their horses move slowly after several exhausting days on the trail. Dust covers uniforms, saddles, and equipment alike. The men appear tired, not triumphant. One scout quietly removes his hat while offering water to his horse before taking a drink himself. The animal comes first. Experience has taught him that. Nearby, another soldier repairs a worn boot using heavy thread and a small awl. Supplies remain valuable. Replacements are never guaranteed. Nothing useful is discarded. The frontier encourages careful stewardship. Research from the University of Oxford has noted that military campaigns across the Western territories depended heavily upon logistics rather than battlefield tactics alone. Distance, weather, transportation, food supplies, and communication frequently shaped operations more decisively than combat itself. The landscape remained a powerful participant, perhaps the strongest one. By late afternoon, clouds gather above the plains. Their shadows drift silently across endless grass while antelope move gracefully towards distant ridges. The beauty feels almost overwhelming. It also carries quiet sadness. Standing here, you realize that different communities look upon the same landscape while imagining entirely different futures. A rancher sees grazing land. A farming family sees fertile fields. A military officer sees strategic routes. A native hunter sees ancestral territory filled with memory and meaning. The land itself remains unchanged. Human understanding does not. Historians continue debating whether peaceful coexistence could have been sustained more successfully under different political circumstances. Some argue that alternative policies and more consistent treaty enforcement might have reduced later conflict. Others believe the enormous scale of migration and competing economic interests made widespread confrontation increasingly difficult to avoid. No simple answer survives, only careful reflection toward evening. You arrive near a temporary military camp, established beside a clear, flowing creek. Soldiers prepare supper while horses graze quietly under watchful eyes. The smell of beef stew drifts gently through the cool air, along with fresh coffee brewing over small fires. The atmosphere feels unexpectedly calm. One officer removes his jacket before helping a younger recruit mend a damaged saddle. Leadership sometimes appears in ordinary kindness, not dramatic speeches. Nearby, a civilian wagon driver shares extra flour with the camp cook after learning that expected supplies have been delayed. Generosity travels easily, especially where isolation is familiar. As darkness settles across the plains, conversations become quieter. Someone recalls home in Ohio. Another remembers fishing with his brothers before joining the army. A third wonders aloud whether he will remain in the West after completing his service. The questions linger. No one answers immediately. The future remains unwritten. You step away from the campfire and look toward the distant prairie. Moonlight washes gently across the endless grasslands, while cool wind brushes softly against your coat. The silence feels profound. Somewhere beyond the horizon, families sleep inside homesteads. Elsewhere, native communities gather around their own evening fires. Railroad workers rest after another day laying track. Cowboys watch peaceful herds beneath the stars. Every group believes tomorrow matters deeply. Every group carries hopes worth understanding. The history of the Old West cannot be reduced to heroes and villains. It is the story of people making difficult choices within changing circumstances they could rarely control completely. That truth asks for patience. It also asks for compassion. The wind continues moving through the tall grass exactly as it did long before any fort, railroad, or settlement appeared. The prairie remembers everything. It judges nothing, and beneath the quiet night sky, the Great Plains continue stretching toward every horizon, holding within them both remarkable achievement and lasting sorrow as the frontier moves steadily into a new age. Your thoughts linger beside the quiet prairie until the first light of morning slowly returns. Dew clings to tall grass, sparkling gently as the rising sun touches each blade. The air feels fresh after the cool night, carrying the scent of wildflowers, damp earth, and faint wood smoke drifting from distant chimneys. The frontier awakens once more, not with grand speeches, with ordinary work. You leave behind the military camp and travel toward a growing settlement where smoke curls from dozens of homes. Roosters announce the beginning of another day. Horses stamp patiently inside small barns. Children hurry across muddy streets, carrying books beneath their arms before lessons begin. Life feels comfortably familiar. Yet, something important has often been overlooked in stories about the American West. Many legends celebrate explorers, soldiers, cowboys, and railroad builders. Far fewer pause to notice the women whose quiet determination held entire communities together. Without them, countless settlements would never have survived. You arrive at a modest farmhouse where a woman has already been awake for several hours. Bread rises beside the warm stove while a kettle gently simmers. She carefully measures flour before pausing to comfort a sleepy child who has wandered into the kitchen rubbing tired eyes. Her morning has only begun. Outside, chickens need feeding. Laundry waits. The vegetable garden requires attention. Later, she will help repair a broken fence before preparing supper. The list never truly ends. Still, she moves calmly. Routine has become its own strength. Research from the University of California has emphasized that women on the 19th century frontier frequently performed an extraordinary range of responsibilities extending far beyond household labor. They managed farms during absences, operated businesses, taught school, delivered medical care, organized churches, and helped establish the social institutions that transformed settlements into lasting communities. The frontier demanded versatility. It rewarded resilience. You follow her through the day. After breakfast, she walks to a nearby schoolhouse carrying several worn books beneath one arm. Today she serves as the community's teacher. The classroom consists of only one room, filled with children of different ages sharing rough wooden desks. The youngest students learn the alphabet. Older pupils practice arithmetic and geography. Everyone studies together. Education grows one lesson at a time. She speaks patiently. Encouragement comes naturally. One little boy struggles to read a passage aloud. He hesitates repeatedly, embarrassed by each mistake, rather than correcting him sharply. She quietly smiles and begins again from the previous sentence. Confidence returns. Sometimes kindness teaches faster than criticism. Outside, the wind rattles the schoolhouse windows while horses graze peacefully nearby. Inside, the scratching of slate pencils creates a soft, steady rhythm almost as calming as rainfall. Learning has its own music. As afternoon arrives, you continue into town, where another woman operates the local general store, while her husband travels east purchasing supplies. She greets every customer warmly, records purchases with careful handwriting, and somehow remembers who still owes payment from previous months. Trust becomes part of commerce. Reputation becomes currency. Nearby, another woman manages the settlement's small boarding house. Travelers arrive exhausted after days on dusty roads. She welcomes them with warm meals, clean blankets, and simple conversation that eases the loneliness of constant travel. Hospitality becomes quiet medicine. Not every frontier contribution appears dramatic. Historians continue discussing the extent to which frontier life expanded opportunities for women compared with established Eastern communities. Some scholars argue that labor shortages and practical necessity allowed women to assume broader economic and civic responsibilities than social customs elsewhere encouraged. Others note that traditional expectations remained powerful despite these expanded roles. Both realities existed. Circumstances often shaped possibilities more than ideology. By late afternoon, your attention turns toward a woman riding alone across open country carrying a leather medical bag fastened securely behind her saddle. She serves several isolated families spread across many miles. A baby has been born. An elderly rancher has fallen ill. A child has broken an arm. There are no specialists nearby. No large hospitals. Only knowledge, experience, determination. She rides without complaint despite gathering storm clouds on the western horizon. Someone needs help. That is enough. Research from Harvard University has noted that access to professional medical care remained limited throughout much of the 19th century frontier, leading many communities to depend heavily upon local practitioners, midwives, and women with practical medical experience gained through years of service. Their contributions often received little public recognition. Their importance cannot be overstated. The storm finally arrives just before sunset. Rain drums steadily across rooftops, while muddy streets quickly fill with shallow pools reflecting lantern light. Inside one modest home, several neighboring women gather to sew clothing for a family whose house recently burned. Nobody asks for payment. Nobody expects praise. The work simply needs doing. One elderly widow quietly teaches a younger mother how to repair worn boots using scraps of leather saved from earlier projects. Nothing useful is wasted. Neither is experience. Knowledge flows naturally between generations. You notice a small girl sitting nearby, carefully watching every stitch. She says very little. She is learning anyway. Many frontier traditions survive because children observe long before anyone formally teaches them. Evening settles gently across the settlement. The rain eases. Fresh earth releases its rich fragrance into the cooling air, while frogs begin calling from nearby ponds. Families gather for supper. Conversation replaces the sounds of labor. One father thanks his wife for managing the farm, while he spent several days helping neighbors repair a collapsed bridge. She shrugs modestly. To her, it was simply another week. The quiet heroism of ordinary life rarely announces itself. It simply continues as darkness deepens. The church bell rings softly across the town. Its sound drifts through open windows before fading into the peaceful night. You pause outside beneath a sky where clouds slowly separate, revealing countless stars above the frontier. Their light shines equally upon every home, every family, every dream. You begin reflecting upon how incomplete the history of the Old West becomes whenever these countless women disappear into the background of larger stories. They planted gardens that fed growing towns. They taught children who would build future communities. They kept businesses open. They healed the sick. They preserved traditions. They carried families through hardship with remarkable endurance. The frontier did not survive through courage alone. It survived through care. As the evening breeze moves gently through the trees, carrying the comforting scent of wet leaves and wood smoke, you understand that some of the greatest builders of the American West left behind no famous battles, no celebrated speeches, and few monuments. Instead, They left thriving communities. Perhaps that is the greater legacy, and beneath the quiet stars, the settlement sleeps peacefully, held together by countless acts of patient devotion that history is only beginning to fully remember. Your thoughts remain with the quiet settlement as another peaceful morning begins. Sunlight filters gently through cottonwood branches, casting soft shadows across wooden porches still damp from the night's cool air. Somewhere nearby, a rooster calls while the smell of fresh biscuits drifts from an open kitchen window. The town wakes slowly, without urgency, without spectacle. By now, you have traveled alongside explorers, settlers, mountain men, native communities, miners, railroad workers, soldiers, and ranchers. Yet there is another side of the Old West that rarely appears in famous stories. It is the ordinary day, the one that begins with sweeping the porch rather than riding into danger. You stroll down the main street just after sunrise. Shopkeepers unlock their doors one by one. A baker places warm loaves on wooden shelves while the comforting aroma of fresh bread spreads through the cool morning air. People smile as they pass. Many know one another by name. A blacksmith has already begun his work. The steady ringing of his hammer echoes through the town, blending with the distant sound of wagon wheels crossing a wooden bridge. Across the street, the barber sweeps yesterday's hair from his floor before hanging a freshly painted sign outside. Nothing extraordinary happens. That is precisely the point. Stable communities are built through ordinary mornings. A young mother enters the general store carrying a handwritten shopping list folded carefully inside her apron pocket. She purchases flour, sugar, lamp oil, and thread before exchanging a few friendly words with the shopkeeper. News travels quickly, not through newspapers alone. Through conversation, someone mentions that a neighboring family has welcomed a new baby. Another speaks about an upcoming barn raising. A farmer reports that the wheat crop looks healthier after recent rain. Small stories create shared identity. The settlement feels connected because everyone contributes to its daily rhythm. Research from the University of Pennsylvania has shown that local businesses, churches, schools, and civic organizations played central roles in creating stable frontier communities, rather than existing merely as temporary outposts. Many Western towns quickly developed social institutions that encouraged cooperation, education, and long-term investment. Community grows through repetition, not dramatic moments. You continue walking toward the town marketplace. Farmers arrange baskets filled with fresh vegetables, while ranchers discuss livestock prices beneath shaded awnings. Chickens cluck noisily inside wooden crates waiting to be sold. The market smells wonderfully alive. Fresh apples, leather harnesses, sawdust, coffee, hay. Each scent blends gently into the next. One elderly carpenter proudly displays a beautifully crafted rocking chair outside his workshop. He runs his hand across the smooth wood before quietly explaining that it took nearly 3 weeks to complete. Quality requires patience. His customer understands. Nearby, 2 children spend their afternoon helping their father repaint the family fence. The work progresses slowly because they occasionally become distracted by butterflies drifting across the nearby field. Their father laughs. There is no need to hurry. Some memories deserve extra time. As midday arrives, church bells ring softly across the town. A few people pause briefly before returning to their work. Others gather inside for prayer or quiet reflection. Faith means different things to different families. Yet the church serves another purpose as well. It becomes a meeting place, a schoolroom, a shelter during storms, a center for community gatherings. Buildings often serve many lives. Historians continue debating how strongly religion shaped frontier society compared with economic opportunity. Some scholars argue that churches quickly became foundations of civic life wherever settlement stabilized. Others suggest that practical concerns often took precedence during the earliest years, with organized religious institutions expanding gradually afterward. The historical record reveals considerable variety. Every town develops differently. By early afternoon, the local newspaper editor sits beside an open window where warm summer air gently stirs loose sheets of paper across his desk. His printing press waits patiently in the next room. He edits carefully. Every sentence matters. The next edition will include crop prices, advertisements, community announcements, local elections, and a serialized adventure story that many children eagerly anticipate each week. Information creates belonging. Readers begin sharing common experiences. Research from Columbia University has noted that local newspapers became powerful instruments for shaping civic identity across the 19th century American West. Beyond reporting events, they encouraged investment, attracted newcomers, supported local businesses, and fostered political discussion. Printed words helped build permanent towns. As afternoon begins cooling toward evening, you visit the settlement's small library. It occupies only one modest room above the post office, yet its shelves contain treasured books collected through years of careful donations. A teenage girl quietly borrows a volume on natural science. An older rancher selects a history book. A school teacher returns several well-worn novels. Knowledge travels remarkably well, even across great distances. One elderly woman sits beside the window, knitting while reading aloud to 3 children gathered around her chair. The story captures every imagination. Outside, horses pass steadily along the street. Inside, entire worlds unfold through simple pages. Toward sunset, neighbors gather beside a newly completed barn for a community supper. Long wooden tables fill with roasted chicken, fresh vegetables, homemade pies, preserves, and warm bread still carrying the comforting aroma of the oven. The meal feels generous, not extravagant. Everyone has contributed something. Someone brings music. Another family organizes simple games for the children. Older residents exchange memories of the settlement's earliest days, smiling at how much has changed in so few years. One man points toward the busy street beyond the fields. He remembers when nothing stood there except tall grass. The transformation still amazes him. Research from the University of California has highlighted that cooperative labor events such as barn raisings, harvest gatherings, and shared meals strengthen social bonds while helping frontier families accomplish projects impossible for individual households alone. Mutual assistance became practical. It also became tradition. As darkness slowly settles across the town, lanterns begin glowing warmly behind windows. Their soft light reflects across quiet streets where only a few late travelers remain. The day's work has ended. Its meaning remains. You sit peacefully on the wooden porch of the boarding house while listening to crickets sing beneath the stars. The night air carries the gentle scent of wood smoke and freshly cut hay. The town feels settled, comfortably lived in. The Old West is often remembered for moments of extraordinary excitement. Yet, most people experience something far different. They woke early, worked honestly, helped neighbors, raised children, attended school, read newspapers, shared meals, repaired fences, laughed together, mourned together, built ordinary lives. Those quiet routines became the true foundation of Western civilization. Without them, legends would have had nowhere to live. The stars shine steadily overhead as another peaceful evening embraces the frontier. Tomorrow will bring another ordinary day and another chance to quietly shape history without anyone realizing it at the time. Your thoughts remain on the quiet porch as dawn slowly returns once more. The familiar sounds of the frontier greet the morning with gentle confidence. A wagon rolls across the main street. A rooster calls from behind a nearby barn. Somewhere in the distance, a locomotive whistle echoes softly through the cool air before fading into silence. The West is still growing, but now it is growing differently. The frontier that once depended upon isolated cabins and scattered trading posts is becoming something larger. New industries appear beside old ranches. Banks open where blacksmith shops once stood alone. Telegraph wires stretch beside railroad tracks, carrying messages across vast distances with astonishing speed. The pace of change quietly accelerates. You walk toward the center of a rapidly expanding town. The dusty streets you have grown accustomed to are slowly giving way to wooden sidewalks. Brick buildings now stand beside older log structures, creating a landscape where two different eras seem to exist together. The past has not disappeared. It simply shares space with the future. A mason carefully places another brick into the wall of a new courthouse. His hands move with deliberate precision despite years of experience. Strong foundations matter, especially when people expect permanence. Nearby, carpenters finish the frame of a two-story hotel designed to welcome business travelers arriving by train. The building seems remarkably ambitious compared with the simple boarding houses of only a decade earlier. Confidence has become visible. The community now expects tomorrow to arrive. Research from the University of California has shown that industrial investment and transportation improvements transformed many Western towns into regional commercial centers during the late 19th century. Railroads, mining, agriculture, and manufacturing increasingly worked together, creating economies that extended far beyond local markets. The frontier begins connecting to the nation in ways earlier settlers could scarcely imagine. You step inside a newly established bank, where polished wooden counters replace the rough tables once common in frontier settlements. Farmers discuss crop loans with quiet seriousness. Ranchers deposit earnings from successful cattle sales. A young shopkeeper seeks financing to expand her growing business. Money itself feels different here, not simply coins carried in pockets. Capital becomes another tool for building communities. The bank manager carefully records each transaction in an enormous ledger whose pages are filled with neat columns of numbers. Behind every figure lies a family, a business, a dream. Across the street, the telegraph office remains busy from sunrise onward. The clicking sound of the telegraph key has become so familiar that many residents barely notice it anymore. Messages arrive from hundreds of miles away. Market prices, railroad schedules, family news, political developments. What once required weeks of travel now arrives in minutes. Distance continues shrinking. Research from Columbia University has emphasized that communication technologies, such as the telegraph, fundamentally reshaped commercial decision-making across 19th century America. Businesses could respond to changing conditions with unprecedented speed, allowing Western communities to participate more fully in national markets. Information becomes a valuable resource, perhaps as valuable as land itself. You continue toward the edge of town, where a small factory produces farming equipment. Steam powers several heavy machines inside the workshop. Belts turn steadily overhead, while skilled workers shape iron parts with remarkable efficiency. The building hums with quiet energy. Every machine performs its task. One worker carefully inspects each finished plow before placing it onto a waiting wagon. He knows that a poorly made tool could cost another farmer an entire season's harvest. Craftsmanship still matters, even in an industrial age. Nearby, a young apprentice watches every movement with careful attention. His teacher pauses frequently, explaining not only how each machine operates, but why precision matters. Knowledge remains personal. Even as technology advances, historians continue debating whether industrialization strengthened or weakened the independence traditionally associated with frontier life. Some scholars argue that growing economic integration reduced local self-sufficiency by increasing dependence upon distant markets and manufactured goods. Others suggest that improved technology expanded opportunities while making life more secure and productive. The answer depends upon perspective. Progress often carries both gains and losses. By afternoon, you visit the town's expanding business district. New storefronts display manufactured clothing, sewing machines, clocks, books, and furniture transported by rail from factories across the country. Choice becomes abundant, compared with earlier decades. One elderly settler quietly examines a polished kitchen stove displayed inside a merchant's window. He smiles thoughtfully before remarking that his first frontier home contained little more than a fireplace and a few cooking pots. The change feels extraordinary. He has lived long enough to witness two different worlds. Research from the University of Chicago has noted that consumer goods became increasingly available throughout the American West during the late 19th century as transportation networks expanded and manufacturing costs declined. Comfort slowly became more accessible, though never equally shared. Outside the hardware store, several farmers gather around a newly demonstrated mechanical harvester. They watch closely as the salesman explains how the machine may reduce weeks of exhausting labor. Some appear impressed, others remain cautious. New inventions always inspire mixed reactions. One farmer folds his arms thoughtfully. He wonders whether the machine will truly perform as promised. His skepticism feels reasonable. Experience has taught him that advertisements sometimes exaggerate. As evening approaches, the town's electric streetlights begin glowing one by one along the busiest blocks. Older residents pause to admire them, despite having seen the lights many times before. The soft illumination feels almost magical. Children laugh while chasing one another beneath the bright lamps. Shopkeepers remain open later because customers can now browse comfortably after sunset. Night itself begins changing. Opportunity extends into new hours. A local pharmacist quietly closes his shop after helping a worried mother select medicine for her feverish son. Across the street, a lawyer finishes reviewing property documents beneath steady electric light rather than flickering candles. Small conveniences quietly reshape daily routines. Few people notice at first. Later, they cannot imagine living without them. You stroll toward the railroad station where another evening train prepares to depart. Passengers board carrying leather suitcases instead of heavy wagon supplies. Businessmen discuss investments. College students return home for holidays. Families greet arriving relatives with warm embraces. Travel has become ordinary. Its significance remains extraordinary. The frontier no longer feels isolated from the wider nation. It has become one of its vital engines. You pause beside the platform as the train slowly disappears into the gathering darkness. Its rhythmic sound gradually fades until only the gentle chorus of evening insects remains. The silence feels familiar, yet transformed. The Old West has entered a new chapter where industry, technology, education, and commerce stand beside ranches, farms, and open grasslands. The frontier has not vanished. It has matured. Beneath the quiet evening sky, surrounded by both tradition and innovation, you realize that history rarely moves in sudden leaps. More often, it advances through thousands of ordinary improvements, quietly changing everyday life until one generation awakens to discover the world has become almost unrecognizable. The stars continue shining above the growing town. Below them, tomorrow is already under construction. Your thoughts follow the departing train until its distant whistle disappears into the cool evening air. The growing town gradually settles into silence. Shop windows grow dark one by one. Horses shift quietly inside nearby stables. A gentle breeze carries the comforting scent of wood smoke and dry grass across the sleeping streets. The West has become calmer. Yet one part of its story continues growing larger. Its legends. You have already met hard-working ranchers, patient teachers, careful merchants, determined settlers, and exhausted railroad workers. Their lives form the true foundation of the frontier. Yet, as the 19th century moves toward its close, another image begins capturing the public imagination. The outlaw. Stories travel faster than facts, especially when they promise excitement. You arrive in a lively frontier town where the evening newspaper has just been delivered. Several townspeople gather outside the general store, while one man eagerly reads aloud a report describing another bank robbery hundreds of miles away. The listeners lean closer. Every detail seems fascinating. Nobody witnessed the event. Everyone has an opinion. The story grows slightly with every retelling. That is often how legends begin. Popular culture later transforms figures such as Jesse James, Billy the Kid, Butch Cassidy, and the Sundance Kid into larger-than-life characters, books, newspaper articles, traveling shows, and eventually motion pictures reshape public memory until fact and fiction become difficult to separate. Reality proves more complicated. Research from Princeton University has emphasized that many famous Western outlaws spent surprisingly brief periods committing crimes before being arrested, killed, or disappearing into ordinary life. Their historical influence often became magnified because newspapers recognized that dramatic crime stories attracted readers. Sensational headlines sell newspapers. They always have. You continue walking through town until you reach the sheriff's office. The building is modest, containing little more than a desk, several chairs, a holding cell, and shelves filled with carefully organized records. The sheriff studies paperwork, not revolvers. He spends much of his day collecting taxes, settling property disputes, searching for lost livestock, and organizing court appearances. The routine rarely resembles popular fiction. One rancher enters carrying a weathered hat in his hands. He has come to report several missing horses. The sheriff listens patiently before making careful notes. No dramatic music plays. No immediate chase begins. Instead, he asks practical questions. When were the horses last seen? Which direction did they travel? Who else might have noticed them? Real investigations begin with careful observation, not dramatic conclusions. Historians continue debating how widespread organized outlaw activity actually became across the American West. Some researchers argue that certain regions experienced genuine waves of banditry during periods of rapid growth and weak institutions. Others maintain that later entertainment greatly exaggerated the scale of frontier crime by focusing upon exceptional cases rather than ordinary experience. The evidence favors balance. Crime certainly existed. So did peaceful daily life. Research from the University of Chicago has noted that homicide rates varied enormously from one Western community to another, making broad generalizations difficult. Many frontier towns experienced relatively ordinary patterns of crime, while a smaller number of rapidly growing boom towns faced temporary increases associated with sudden population changes. Every town followed its own path. History resists simple stereotypes. As afternoon sunlight warms the dusty street, you notice a traveling photographer carefully arranging his equipment outside the hotel. Curious children gather nearby, while adults patiently wait their turn for portraits. The photographer adjusts each person's posture. He asks everyone to remain perfectly still. The exposure requires patience. One elderly couple sits together holding hands, almost unnoticed beneath the frame. Their quiet affection feels timeless. Years from now, that photograph may become a treasured family memory. History survives through ordinary faces, not famous names alone. Nearby, a bookstore displays newly printed adventure novels, whose colorful covers promise thrilling tales of fearless gunfighters and daring escapes. A teenage boy eagerly spends his saved coins on one. His father smiles knowingly. He remembers similar stories from his own youth. Adventure has always appealed to imagination, even when reality looks different. You wander toward the edge of town, where several ranch hands finish repairing a broken fence before sunset. They laugh together while sharing stories from earlier cattle drives. One jokes about falling into a muddy creek after his horse decided to stop unexpectedly. The others laugh warmly. Nobody mentions famous outlaws. Their own experiences provide enough entertainment. That contrast feels important. Real lives rarely resemble legends. As evening approaches, the local theater opens its doors for a traveling performance. Families gather eagerly beneath glowing lanterns while musicians tune their instruments behind the curtain. Tonight's play tells the story of a heroic lawman pursuing dangerous criminals across the frontier. The audience applauds enthusiastically. Everyone understands it is entertainment. Many also recognize familiar exaggerations. The line between truth and storytelling grows wonderfully blurred. Research from Stanford University has explored how popular entertainment during the late 19th century helped shape lasting images of the American West. traveling performances, illustrated magazines. And later, early films often emphasized dramatic conflict because audiences eagerly embraced exciting narratives. Memory favors emotion, not always accuracy. Inside the theater, a little girl watches the performance with wide eyes before quietly whispering to her grandmother. "Did those things really happen?" Her grandmother smiles gently. "Some did," she replies, "but not quite like that." The answer feels perfect. History often arrives wrapped inside stories. Your attention drifts toward a retired deputy sitting peacefully on a bench outside after the performance ends. His hair has turned completely white. His hands remain strong despite the passing years. He watches families walking home beneath the stars. Children laugh. Couples stroll quietly together. Neighbors exchange goodnight wishes. "This," he says softly to no one in particular, "is what most days were really like." His words linger long after he falls silent. Ordinary peace rarely earns headlines, yet it shapes far more lives. The night grows cooler as crickets begin singing from nearby fields. Moonlight washes gently across the quiet streets where only a few lanterns remain burning. You realize that legends perform an important service. They preserve excitement. They inspire imagination. They encourage curiosity. But the true history of the Old West lives elsewhere. It lives inside families building homes, teachers opening schools, doctors caring for patients, farmers harvesting wheat, railroad workers laying track, merchants balancing ledgers, neighbors helping one another after storms. These people rarely became famous. They built the world that legends merely visited. As you stand beneath the clear western sky, the stars seem wonderfully unchanged despite everything history has already transformed below them. The frontier has always contained remarkable stories. The greatest among them may simply be the millions of ordinary lives that quietly carried the American West from wilderness toward enduring community. For a moment, it feels as though the wind itself has begun to slow. The broad grasslands still stretch toward every horizon. Yet, something subtle has changed. Where you once saw uninterrupted prairie, long fences now divide the land into measured fields. Telegraph poles stand at regular intervals. Railroad tracks cross valleys that only a generation earlier had echoed with little more than birdsong and hoofbeats. The frontier still exists, but it no longer feels endless. You ride quietly along a familiar trail that has changed almost beyond recognition. Years ago, wagon wheels carved deep ruts into soft earth as families pushed westward with uncertain hopes. Today, many of those same routes have become well-traveled roads connecting prosperous towns, busy farms, and growing cities. The wilderness has not disappeared. It has become part of everyday life. One elderly settler pauses beside a weathered fence and studies the surrounding fields with thoughtful eyes. He remembers arriving here as a young man, when there had been no fences, no bridges, and no permanent buildings. Now, orchards fill the nearby valley. Children walk safely to school. Church bells ring each Sunday. His smile carries both pride and quiet nostalgia. He helped build this place. He also misses the world that came before. That feeling becomes increasingly common during the closing years of the 19th century. Research from Yale University has emphasized that the rapid expansion of railroads, agriculture, towns, and commercial development fundamentally reshaped the American West by the end of the century. Land that had once seemed remote became increasingly connected to national markets, transportation systems, and government institutions. The frontier grows smaller. Opportunity becomes more organized. You continue riding until you reach a long line of barbed wire stretching across the prairie. The fence appears simple enough, yet it quietly represents one of the most significant changes in Western history. Before fences, cattle often grazed freely across vast open ranges. After fences, boundaries become unmistakably clear. Ownership takes visible form. Research from Harvard University has noted that the widespread adoption of barbed wire transformed ranching practices by allowing farmers and ranchers to protect crops, manage livestock more efficiently, and define private property across enormous areas at relatively low cost. One invention, countless consequences. Nearby, two neighboring ranchers stand together examining a newly completed fence. They discuss grazing rights, water access, and upcoming repairs with calm practicality. The conversation remains friendly. Clear boundaries reduce many disagreements. Yet, elsewhere, fences create entirely new conflicts by restricting long-established travel routes for livestock and wildlife. Progress rarely benefits everyone equally. Historians continue debating whether the so-called closing of the frontier represented a sharp historical turning point or a gradual transformation unfolding over several decades. Some scholars emphasize symbolic moments, while others argue that regional differences make any single date too simplistic. History rarely closes its chapters neatly. They tend to overlap. The afternoon sun warms the fields where mechanical harvesters now work alongside teams of horses. Their steady movement across golden wheat would have astonished the earliest settlers who struggled with hand tools and uncertain harvests. Efficiency has improved. Hard work has not disappeared. One farmer carefully wipes dust from the engine of a new machine before allowing his curious son to climb onto the driver's seat. The boy grins with delight. His father smiles just as broadly. Technology often inspires hope across generations. Farther down the road, a rural mail carrier arrives with newspapers, letters, and small parcels from distant cities. Children run eagerly toward the wagon, hoping for news from relatives living hundreds of miles away. Distance continues shrinking. Relationships remain important. Research from the University of Chicago has shown that expanding postal services and transportation networks strengthened social and economic ties between Western communities and the rest of the nation during the late 19th century. Communication builds belonging, almost as surely as roads and railroads. As evening approaches, you visit a county fair held on the outskirts of a thriving town. The fairgrounds are filled with livestock competitions, farming demonstrations, music, homemade crafts, and cheerful conversation. Families stroll peacefully beneath colorful banners. Children laugh while riding a simple wooden carousel. Neighbors greet one another warmly after months apart. The frontier now celebrates harvests more often than survival. One elderly woman proudly displays a quilt she has spent nearly 2 years completing. Every square contains fabric saved from old dresses, work shirts, baby blankets, and worn coats. Nothing has been wasted. Every piece carries memory. A young visitor admires the careful stitching before asking how long such work requires. The woman smiles. A lifetime, she answers gently. Her reply means more than sewing. Nearby, a photography exhibit displays images taken across the West during the previous decades. Visitors study portraits of mountain men, wagon trains, mining camps, native families, railroad crews, and early settlements. Some recognize familiar faces. Others search for grandparents they have only heard about through family stories. Photographs preserve moments. Memory preserves meaning. Historians continue discussing how quickly Americans themselves recognized that the Old West was becoming history rather than present reality. Some believed change happened suddenly. Others hardly noticed because daily life continued evolving step by step. Most people rarely realize they are living through the end of an era. Only later does history reveal its shape. As twilight settles across the fairgrounds, musicians begin playing gentle melodies beneath strings of glowing lanterns. Couples dance slowly while children grow sleepy in their parents' arms. The evening feels peaceful, almost timeless. You step away from the crowd and look toward the distant horizon where open prairie still stretches beyond cultivated fields. The land remembers both worlds: the wild grass, the growing towns, the wagon trails, the railroad lines. Neither completely replaces the other. Together, they form the story of the American West. The frontier has not truly vanished. Its spirit has simply changed. It now lives inside communities confident enough to build schools instead of temporary camps, libraries instead of supply depots, and permanent homes instead of hurried shelters. You breathe deeply as the cool evening breeze carries the scent of harvested wheat, fresh hay, and faint wood smoke drifting across the countryside. The air feels comforting, familiar, earned. The Old West is no longer defined only by exploration. It is becoming a place where generations are born without ever knowing the uncertainty their grandparents once accepted as ordinary life. That quiet success may be the greatest frontier achievement of all. Above you, the same stars continue shining across the western sky. Below them, the frontier gently settles into history while carrying its enduring spirit forward into every tomorrow yet to come. Your thoughts drift gently beyond the county fair as another sunrise paints the western sky with soft shades of gold and pale blue. The morning air feels crisp and carries the comforting scent of fresh hay drying in nearby fields. Dew sparkles across wooden fences while church bells quietly announce the beginning of another peaceful Sunday. The frontier feels settled, yet it continues changing. The great migrations have slowed compared with earlier decades. But the American West is entering a different kind of transformation. Territories that once depended upon military forts and temporary government officials now begin seeking something more permanent. They seek statehood. The change may sound administrative. In reality, it touches nearly every part of daily life. You arrive in a growing western capital, where government buildings stand beside busy markets and railroad depots. The streets are wider than those of earlier frontier towns. Brick sidewalks replace many of the old wooden walkways. Trees planted years before now cast generous shade across public squares. The settlement feels confident. It expects to endure. Outside the courthouse, citizens gather to discuss elections, public schools, roads, water systems, and taxes. These conversations lack the excitement of gold discoveries or cattle drives. They shape the future just as deeply. Research from the University of California has emphasized that the admission of Western territories as states represented far more than political symbolism. Statehood encouraged investment, expanded legal institutions, strengthened public education, and provided greater representation within the federal government. Communities gained stability. Investors gained confidence. Families gained permanence. One elderly rancher quietly removes his hat while watching a group of school children cross the town square carrying books beneath their arms. He smiles. When he first arrived, decades earlier, there had been no school. Now there are two. Progress sometimes becomes visible through children rather than buildings. You continue toward the local schoolhouse, where lessons have expanded well beyond reading and arithmetic. Older students now study history, science, geography, and literature. A teacher carefully unfolds a large map of the United States before asking the class to identify the newest states. Small hands rise eagerly. The children answer with confidence. To them, these places have always belonged on the map. They cannot imagine the uncertainty their grandparents once knew. History becomes memory surprisingly quickly. Nearby, the town library has grown considerably since your last visit. New shelves hold volumes on engineering, agriculture, medicine, law, and natural science. Knowledge continues arriving by rail. One young woman quietly borrows a medical textbook. She hopes to continue her education in one of the larger cities before returning home to serve her community. Her ambitions feel entirely natural. Only a generation earlier, such opportunities would have been far more difficult to pursue. Research from Columbia University has noted that expanding educational institutions throughout the American West helped create professional communities that gradually reduced the region's dependence upon Eastern expertise. The West increasingly educated its own future. Doctors, teachers, engineers, lawyers, business leaders. The frontier matures intellectually as well as economically. Historians continue debating whether Western statehood accelerated modernization or merely recognized changes already well underway. Some scholars argue that formal political recognition attracted additional investment and migration. Others believe economic development had already made statehood almost inevitable. Both arguments contain convincing evidence. History often rewards multiple explanations, as afternoon sunlight warms the streets. You visit a busy courthouse where local officials discuss plans for new roads, irrigation projects, and public buildings. The conversation feels remarkably practical. Nobody speaks about conquering wilderness. Instead, they discuss budgets, bridges, water rights, school funding. Civilization announces itself through administration. One county clerk carefully files stacks of property records into sturdy wooden cabinets. Every document represents a family, a farm, a business, a future. Paper quietly organizes the landscape. Outside, immigrant families from many different backgrounds continue shaping Western communities. Some operate bakeries. Others establish vineyards, workshops, grocery stores, or construction companies. Languages and traditions remain wonderfully diverse. The West grows richer because of them. Research from Stanford University has highlighted the extraordinary diversity of Western settlement during the late 19th century. People from Europe, Asia, Latin America, and other regions contributed significantly to agriculture, mining, transportation, commerce, and urban development. The frontier was never built by one group alone. Its strength came from many hands. As evening approaches, you stroll through a public park planted where open prairie once stretched uninterrupted toward the horizon. Children sail small wooden boats across a decorative pond. Older couples sit quietly beneath newly grown shade trees. A brass band performs gentle music from the town gazebo. The atmosphere feels peaceful, deliberately so. One elderly woman points toward a broad avenue lined with young elm trees. "I remember when this was nothing but wagon ruts," she says softly. Her grandson listens with wide eyes. To him, the paved street seems as permanent as the mountains. He cannot imagine anything different. Memory changes faster than landscapes. Nearby, workers continue installing electric lines through newly developed neighborhoods. At the same time, horse-drawn wagons still deliver milk before sunrise. Two eras quietly overlap. Neither fully replaces the other. Historians continue discussing exactly when the American West ceased being a frontier and became simply another region of the nation. The answer varies depending upon geography, economics, and personal experience. For some families, the frontier ended with the arrival of railroads. For others, it ended when schools, hospitals, and reliable roads became ordinary parts of daily life. Some never believed it truly ended at all. As twilight settles over the town, warm lights begin appearing behind hundreds of windows. The smell of evening meals drifts through quiet neighborhoods. Roast chicken, fresh bread, apple pie cooling on windowsills. The comforting aromas feel familiar. Home has become established here. You pause beside the courthouse steps and look across the peaceful town square. Children laugh while chasing one another across neatly trimmed grass. Storekeepers close their shops with unhurried confidence. Church bells mark the passing hour. The West has not lost its character. It has gained roots. The restless frontier of explorers and wagon trains has gradually become a collection of enduring communities whose identities continue evolving with each passing generation. You breathe deeply, enjoying the cool evening breeze, carrying the scent of blooming flowers mixed with distant wood smoke. The air feels settled, content. The American West no longer asks whether it belongs to the nation. It has become one of the places helping define what that nation will become. And beneath the quiet stars that have watched every generation arrive, another peaceful evening reminds you that lasting civilizations are built not only through bold journeys, but through the patient work of remaining. Your mind lingers in the peaceful town as another morning arrives, bright and clear beneath a wide western sky. The first rays of sunlight reflect from shop windows, church steeples, and railroad tracks that now seem as natural a part of the landscape as rivers or hills. The frontier you first entered so many years ago has become a region of neighborhoods, businesses, schools, and growing industries. Yet, history never truly stands still. Even settled places continue changing. You begin walking along the busy main street where wagons still roll over packed earth. But they now share space with bicycles, electric streetcars in larger cities, and an increasing number of noisy motor cars that attract curious glances wherever they appear. The old and the new travel together. For now, one elderly rancher pauses beside the road as a sputtering automobile rattles past in a cloud of dust. He removes his hat, not out of respect, out of surprise. The machine disappears around a distant corner while his horse watches with calm indifference. Some changes seem almost unbelievable. Research from Stanford University has shown that the closing years of the 19th century and the opening years of the 20th brought extraordinary technological transformation to the American West. Railroads expanded further. Electricity spread through many communities. Irrigation projects increased agricultural production. And new industries gradually diversified regional economies. Progress no longer arrives occasionally. It becomes continuous. You continue toward a busy freight yard, where railroad workers unload manufactured goods arriving from factories thousands of miles away. Crates contain sewing machines, printing presses, farm equipment, furniture, and household appliances that earlier generations could scarcely have imagined owning. Opportunity now arrives by schedule, not by wagon train. Nearby, fruit growers carefully pack peaches and apples into sturdy wooden boxes before loading them onto refrigerated rail cars. Fresh produce will soon travel across the continent. Distance has become an economic challenge, not an impossible barrier. Research from the University of California has emphasized that improved transportation and refrigeration dramatically expanded agricultural markets across the American West, allowing farmers and orchard owners to sell products far beyond their local communities. The harvest now reaches distant tables. The land supports far more people than before. As midday approaches, you visit a growing manufacturing district where small factories produce clothing, agricultural machinery, canned food, and building materials. Steam whistles announce the beginning and end of work shifts. Workers arrive carrying lunch pails instead of rifles. Their daily routine feels familiar, orderly, predictable. The frontier economy has matured. One young machinist carefully oils a large piece of equipment before starting another day's production. His father had driven cattle across open ranges decades earlier. Now the son builds machines. Both contribute to the same region, in different ways. Historians continue debating whether industrial growth fundamentally replaced the traditional frontier economy or simply expanded upon it. Some scholars argue that ranching and farming remained central despite increasing urbanization. Others emphasize that manufacturing, finance, and transportation gradually assumed larger roles in shaping Western prosperity. The transformation proves uneven. Different communities evolve at different speeds. You leave the factory district and walk toward a busy neighborhood filled with immigrant families whose customs enrich the growing cities of the West. Fresh bread cools in one bakery window. Another shop offers handmade clothing. A nearby restaurant serves comforting meals prepared according to family traditions carried across oceans before finding new homes here. Children move easily between cultures. Their parents remember distant homelands. Their futures belong here. Research from Columbia University has highlighted the extraordinary diversity of Western urban growth during this period, noting that immigrant communities contributed significantly to commerce, construction, education, agriculture, and civic life. The West continues welcoming new stories. Its identity remains unfinished. By afternoon, you arrive at a newly established public park where families enjoy a peaceful day beneath carefully planted shade trees. Children fly homemade kites. Grandparents sit quietly on wooden benches. Young couples stroll along winding paths lined with flowers. The scene feels wonderfully ordinary. Earlier generations would scarcely have imagined such leisure. One little boy proudly shows his grandfather a model airplane carved from scrap wood. The older man laughs warmly. "When I was your age," he says, We were still amazed by trains. Both generations smile. Every age believes it lives in modern times. Nearby, the local high school dismisses students for the afternoon. Groups of young people leave carrying textbooks on mathematics, chemistry, literature, and engineering. Many dream of attending college. Some hope to become teachers. Others imagine careers in medicine, business, or law. The horizon has changed. It now includes professions once unavailable in many frontier communities. Research from Harvard University has observed that expanding educational opportunities across the American West helped create a more diversified workforce during the early 20th century, supporting continued economic growth and civic development. Learning remains an investment. Its rewards often appear years later. As evening approaches, you visit a small ranch still operating just beyond the growing city. Cowboys continue repairing fences and caring for livestock much as their fathers did decades earlier. Some traditions remain. Others quietly adapt. The ranch owner now checks market prices received by telegraph before deciding when to ship cattle east. Old skills meet new technology. Neither replaces the other completely. Historians continue discussing how much of the romantic image of the Old West remained alive during these years. Some argue that the frontier spirit persisted through values of independence, resilience, and self-reliance. Others suggest that increasing urbanization gradually reshaped those ideals into something more modern. Perhaps both are true. The West changes. Its character endures. Twilight settles softly across the countryside. Electric lights begin glowing within the city while distant ranch houses still rely upon oil lamps. The contrast feels gentle, not conflicting. Two generations continue sharing the same landscape. You pause beside a hill overlooking both city streets and open pasture. Behind you, factory whistles announce the end of another workday. Ahead, cattle graze peacefully beneath the fading sunlight. The view tells an entire story. The Old West has not disappeared. It has grown into something broader than anyone standing beside a wagon in 1803 could have imagined. Railroads, schools, businesses, farms, factories, neighborhoods, and ranches now exist together, each carrying part of the frontier's enduring spirit. The evening breeze carries the scent of fresh-cut hay from nearby fields mixed with coal smoke drifting from distant locomotives. Past and future share the same air. Above them both, the familiar stars quietly appear once more, watching another generation prepare to build the next chapter of Western history. Your thoughts rest for a moment on the hill overlooking both the city and the countryside. The evening breeze moves gently through the tall grass, carrying with it the distant whistle of a locomotive and the faint laughter of children returning home before dark. The Old West is still alive, but it is already becoming a memory. That quiet transformation happens almost without anyone noticing. People who once crossed rivers by wagon now purchase train tickets. Children born in brick houses hear stories about sleeping beneath canvas during endless journeys across the plains. To them, those stories sound almost unbelievable. To their grandparents, they are simply remembered life. You leave the hillside and wander into a growing city during the first years of the 20th century. Electric lights glow warmly above busy streets. Streetcars carry passengers from neighborhood to neighborhood. Shop windows display manufactured clothing, cameras, bicycles, clocks, and phonographs. And modern life feels confident. The frontier feels distant. Yet, everywhere you look, reminders of the earlier West quietly remain. An old wagon sits beside a new automobile dealership. A retired cowboy pauses outside a bank built where cattle once grazed. A former gold miner now operates a successful hardware store. History does not vanish. It settles gently beneath everyday life. Research from Stanford University has observed that the rapid modernization of the American West during the late 19th and early 20th centuries coincided with an equally rapid growth of public interest in preserving frontier memories through museums, literature, photography, and historical collections. People sensed something important. An era was passing, You continue into a photography studio where carefully framed portraits cover the walls. Families proudly display images of grandparents dressed in worn trail clothing beside newer photographs showing children in neat school uniforms. Two generations share one frame. One remembers uncertainty, the other inherits stability. The photographer adjusts a heavy camera before asking a family to remain perfectly still. The youngest child struggles not to smile. His grandmother cannot stop smiling. The photograph captures far more than faces. It preserves change itself. Nearby, an elderly woman carefully opens a wooden chest stored beneath her bed. Inside rest small treasures carried across the frontier decades earlier. A faded map, a worn Bible, a tiny pair of baby shoes, a cracked coffee cup, a silver spoon. None possesses great financial value. Every item carries a lifetime of memory. She lifts the old map with surprising tenderness. Its paper has become thin from years of careful unfolding. The trails printed across it now lead to thriving towns connected by railroads and telegraph lines. The world has changed. The map remembers otherwise. Research from Harvard University has highlighted the importance of personal letters, diaries, photographs, and family keepsakes in helping modern historians reconstruct everyday frontier experiences that official government records often overlook. History survives through ordinary people, not only famous events. As afternoon sunlight filters through the windows, you visit a public library where local historians organize early documents donated by longtime residents. Bundles of letters, property deeds, school records, church registers, newspapers carefully tied with fading ribbon. Each document protects another small piece of the past. One volunteer gently brushes dust from an old journal written during an Oregon Trail journey many years earlier. The handwriting remains remarkably clear. Its author could never have imagined strangers reading those pages generations later. Yet here they remain, quiet witnesses. Historians continue debating exactly how quickly Americans themselves began romanticizing frontier life. Some scholars argue that nostalgia appeared almost immediately as modernization accelerated. Others suggest that the legendary image developed gradually through popular entertainment, public exhibitions, and national celebrations. Memory often begins changing before history ends. That may be one of its most curious habits. Outside the library, a traveling storyteller gathers a small crowd beneath the shade of an elm tree. Children sit cross-legged upon the grass, while adults stand nearby listening with equal interest. He tells tales of daring riders, long wagon trains, mountain passes, snowstorms, gold discoveries. Some details remain accurate. Others have grown wonderfully dramatic. Nobody seems to mind. Stories serve different purposes than records. Research from the University of Chicago has noted that popular literature during the late 19th century played a significant role in shaping public understanding of the American West, often emphasizing adventure while simplifying the region's social and historical complexity. Legends travel easily. Nuance requires patience. Toward evening, you visit a small museum recently established by local citizens determined to preserve frontier artifacts before they disappear forever. Inside stand weathered saddles, mining tools, railroad lanterns, handmade quilts, school desks, homestead plows. Each object once belonged to someone's ordinary day. Now it belongs to history. One elderly visitor quietly pauses before an old wagon wheel displayed against the wall. He reaches out, then gently stops his hand before touching it. "I walked beside one just like that," he whispers. No one interrupts him. Some memories deserve silence. Outside, children continue playing beneath the broad western sky. They chase one another with carefree laughter, inventing games inspired by stories they have heard from parents and grandparents. One pretends to drive a wagon. Another becomes a railroad engineer. A third imagines searching for hidden gold. The past becomes imagination. Imagination becomes identity. As twilight settles across the town, you stroll toward the railroad station one final time. Travelers board comfortable passenger coaches carrying polished luggage instead of trail supplies. The journey west has become ordinary transportation. not an uncertain expedition. You pause beside the platform while the departing train slowly gathers speed. Its wheels create a familiar rhythm, not unlike the wagons you first heard so many years ago. Different technology, the same human desire to keep moving forward. The evening air carries the comforting scent of coal smoke mixed with blooming flowers from nearby gardens. The combination feels strangely perfect, old and new sharing one breath. You realize that the Old West has entered something remarkable. It has become both history and legend at the same time. The real people who built farms, schools, railroads, businesses, churches, and communities gradually pass from the world. Their stories remain, sometimes exactly as they happened, sometimes gently polished by memory. Either way, they continue shaping how future generations understand courage, perseverance, sacrifice, and hope. Above the quiet town, the stars shine with the same patient brilliance they offered to explorers. Settlers, native families, railroad workers, teachers, ranchers, and children across every generation. The people changed. The sky never did. And beneath those familiar stars, the American West quietly becomes part of the nation's enduring memory, ready to be carried into every story still waiting to be told. The stars remain above you as they have throughout every mile of this long journey. They watched the first explorers paddle uncertain rivers. They shone over lonely mountain camps where trappers listened to wolves beyond the firelight. They reflected from wagon wheels crossing endless prairie, from railroad tracks stretching toward distant horizons, and from growing towns whose windows glowed warmly against the night. They are still here, patient, unchanging. You breathe deeply as the cool evening air carries the familiar scents that have accompanied you across the centuries. Wood smoke drifts gently from nearby chimneys. Fresh hay rests in neatly stacked barns. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle echoes softly before disappearing into the darkness. The Old West has reached the end of its great transformation. Yet history itself never truly ends. It simply continues through different people. You walk one final time through the peaceful streets of a western town in the year 1912. Electric lights glow steadily above brick storefronts. Children laugh while chasing one another home before bedtime. Merchants close their shops with practiced confidence, expecting to reopen tomorrow. The extraordinary has become ordinary. That may be history's greatest achievement. Research from Harvard University has emphasized that by the early 20th century, the American West had become deeply integrated into the nation's political, economic, and cultural life through transportation, education, commerce, agriculture, and industry. The region no longer stood apart from the country. It helped define it. You pause beside the railroad station where passengers board evening trains without giving much thought to the remarkable engineering that made such journeys possible. Only a few generations earlier, this same trip would have demanded months of exhausting travel. Now it feels routine. Progress often becomes invisible once it succeeds. Nearby, a retired schoolteacher quietly watches the departing train from a wooden bench beneath a row of mature elm trees. She remembers teaching the first class ever held in the settlement. Only 12 students attended. Today, hundreds fill several schools across the growing town. The children she once taught have become farmers, doctors, engineers, merchants, teachers, and parents themselves. Her work continues, even after retirement. Research from Stanford University has noted that education became one of the strongest foundations supporting long-term Western development, helping communities transition from isolated frontier settlements into stable civic societies. Knowledge builds futures, sometimes so gradually that nobody notices until decades have passed. As you continue walking, you pass homes surrounded by gardens carefully planted years before. Apple trees now provide generous shade. Climbing roses cover wooden fences. Front porches hold rocking chairs where elderly couples enjoy the cool evening together. The landscape feels peaceful. It has earned that peace. One grandfather quietly tells his grandchildren about crossing the plains in a covered wagon when he was their age. The children listen with fascination. They cannot imagine such hardship, nor should they. Their comfortable lives represent the success of those earlier sacrifices. Historians continue debating exactly what the phrase "the Old West" truly means. Some scholars view it primarily as a geographic region transformed through settlement and economic development. Others see it as a cultural experience shaped by migration, adaptation, cooperation, and conflict across many different communities. Perhaps neither definition is complete alone. The West was never one story, it was thousands. Native nations whose histories stretch back countless generations. Explorers following uncertain rivers. Mountain men surviving among snowy peaks. Settlers building homes from prairie earth. Women creating schools, businesses, and families. Railroad workers laying steel across impossible landscapes. Cowboys guiding cattle beneath open skies. Miners searching cold rivers for flashes of gold. Merchants opening stores. Teachers opening books. Children opening futures. Together, they created something none of them could have built alone. Research from the University of Oxford has emphasized that understanding the American West requires recognizing both its remarkable opportunities and its profound human costs. Expansion brought innovation, prosperity, and new communities while also transforming landscapes and deeply affecting native peoples whose lives and homelands changed forever. The complete story asks for honesty, not simplicity. You leave the town behind and climb one final gentle hill, overlooking the broad western landscape. Below you, cultivated fields stretch toward distant rivers. Railroad lines shine faintly beneath moonlight. Church steeples rise above quiet neighborhoods. Beyond them, mountains stand exactly where they have always stood. The view contains every chapter of your journey. The wilderness, the trails, the homesteads, the towns, the cities. Nothing has vanished completely. Each era remains layered within the next. The wind brushes softly across your face. It carries no words, only memory. You think back to the first uncertain families who looked west from the edge of familiar civilization, wondering what waited beyond the horizon. They could not have imagined this peaceful evening, nor could they have imagined that people around the world would someday remember their journeys while relaxing quietly before sleep. History has curious ways of connecting lives separated by centuries. As the night grows deeper, countless stars spread across the sky exactly as they did in 1803. They belong equally to every generation, to those who arrived first, to those who came later, to those who remained. And now, for a little while, to you. You have crossed mountains and deserts, followed rivers and railroads, shared campfires and classrooms, walked beside hope, hardship, perseverance, and change. You have seen that the Old West was never merely a place of adventure. It was a place where ordinary people built extraordinary lives through patience, courage, cooperation, and quiet determination. Its greatest legacy is not found in legends. It is found in communities, families, friendships, and the enduring belief that tomorrow can become better than today. As the gentle night breeze continues drifting across the peaceful land, you feel the journey settling comfortably into memory. Like the last glowing ember of a campfire slowly fading beneath the endless western sky, the story has reached its destination. The landscape remains. The stars continue watching. And somewhere beyond the quiet horizon, history patiently waits for another traveler willing to listen. Thank you for spending this peaceful journey through the complete history of the Old West with me. If there was one moment that stayed with you, perhaps a lonely mountain trail, a quiet prairie homestead, a bustling railroad town, or a simple family gathered around an evening fire, I would truly enjoy hearing about it in the comments below. Your favorite moments often inspire future journeys through history. If you found comfort, relaxation, or discovered something new along the way, I hope you will join me again for another quiet adventure into the past. Until then, may tonight's story remind you that history is not only made by famous names, but by ordinary people whose patience and kindness quietly shape the world we share today. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here, and I wish you a peaceful night and restful sleep.